What's going on, guys? This is Junior here, and today I'm going to show you how to build pagination using Spring and Spring Boot, and we're going to put it all together by building an entire application backend and front end. And I'm going to show you that you not only have to make pagination work in the backend, you also have to build the front end, which is also as important as the backend. And for this, we're going to build an entire application. So we're going to build the backend with the database connection, saving all of the users in the database, and then we're going to use Spring Data JPA to generate the paging of the application, and then we're going to use Angular in the front end, and I'm going to show you how we're going to put this application together. So this is the final result that you're looking at right now, and I'm going to give you a quick demo just to show you how this application works. So I'm going to refresh the page. So when you first come into the application, it's going to load all the users, and it's telling you that you have 10 pages worth of users, and it's going to display 10 users per page. And I'm going to show you how you can change that if you want more users, and also show you how to allow the user to change this so that they can ask how many users they want to have per page. But for this demo, I'm just using 10. So we're going to show 10 users. So at the top, I have the navigation bar, and we have a search box so that we can search users. And I'm going to get back to the search box in a minute. So we can search users by passing in their name here and then hit the search button. And once we do this, we should only see users whose name contains the character that we put in the search box. But like I said, we're going to get back to this in a second. So the first thing you notice is at the bottom, I have the pagination. So this is the actual pagination, as you can see here. And because we're on the first page, then the previous button is disabled. And this is what I meant when I said that you also have to work in the front end, because the front end is also very important. So if you build the back end and the pagination is working in the back end, now what about the front end? Because you need to build all of this functionality. And now I can go to page 2. So if I click 2, it's going to take me to page 2. Now I put in the database 100 users. I destroy the database after I build the application, and then I put in all the users again so that the users can be ordered from ID 1 to ID 100. So now you see we're looking at users of ID 11 to ID 20. So we get the next 10 users. And I made it this way so that it can be easy for you, so that you can see we're getting 10 users. So if I click again on page 3, then we're going to get user from 21 to 30, and that's what we're looking at here. And also, of course, I can use the next button. So if I click next, then it's going to take me to the 4th page where I have users from ID 31 to 40. And that's true if I keep pressing next. I can also go backwards. And you notice now, because we're not on page 1, then we can go backwards. So I click previous, then I'm back to page 4 where I get users from ID 31 to 40. And if I go back all the way to page 1, you can see automatically that the previous button is disabled, because if I'm on page 1, then I can't go further back. And also the same logic applies for the last page. So if I click on next, you can see I'm going through all the different pages. And once we get to page 10, the next button is going to disable. So if I do 9 and then I do the last page 10, you can see the same functionalities, because I'm at the end of my list. I don't have any more users. We don't want the users to be able to go to next page if they're on the last page. That wouldn't make sense. And this is all in the back end. So this is not built on the front end. This is built in the back end. So every time we click a page, then we make a request to the back end to request that specific page for that information. So that's the basic pagination. So now let's say I want to search some users. So for example, if I go in here, let's say I'm going to search for Mary. I don't know if I have any Mary, but I'm going to search for Mary. So I'm going to say Mary search. I have no users by that name, and you can see no users found. So we don't have our table anymore. We just have an empty list, and then I'm showing the users, like you, the person using the application, that there's no users to display. So now I can go and delete this Mary and search again. Because I don't put in any search term in the search box, then it searches everybody. And this is the behavior that you would expect from your application. Now say I'm going to search for users with AN in their name. Okay, so if I put AN here and click search, you can see now I have 3 pages. And this is really important because pagination is still working with the search. So when I put the search term in there, in this case AN, and you can see all the users that I have here, they have AN in their name. So you can see AN here, Constantine, there's AN here, there's Wendy's AN, Francis AN. So all these users, at some point in their name, there is AN, the characters A and N together in their name. And like I just mentioned, pagination is still working with the search. So now I can go to the next page, and you see I still have more users with AN in their name if you pay attention to the names, and also everything else is still working. So if I'm on the first page and the search result, then the previous button is disabled, I go to the next page, go to the third page. I have 2 users in the last page. So Sandy and Tammy Linfear. You see they have AN in their name, and this is the last page, and the next button is disabled. So even when we search a term or we search the name of the users, the pagination is still working as expected. And that's what you want in the application, and why I mentioned it's important to build the backend, but also the front end is really important. You're actually going to be writing more code in the front end to make this functionality work than the backend. So I can go back to the first page, I can go up here, I can delete this and then search again, and then now I have all my users displayed. So this is the functionality that I'm going to show you how to build using Spring Boot in the backend with Spring Data JPA and Angular in the front end. Now, if you don't use Angular, let's say you use React.js or some other library, most of the logic that I'm going to write here is going to be the same. You're just going to have to change the syntax to accommodate for that specific JavaScript library. So even if you're not using Angular, this is still going to be really useful for you because you'll get the general concept and ideas about how to do this. And this is the way that applications are supposed to be built, because we never want to load 1,000 users in a UI page because it makes no sense, and the person using the app won't have a good user experience because it's too many users, they can't really manage it, which is why pagination is really important. And also for performance, because you never want to load, let's say, 1 million users. You just do like a select all from users table. And let's say you have 10,000 users. You never want to load 10,000 users anytime. So whoever is using your application, they never want to see 1,000 users displayed on the screen. Even though you see there's a lot of tutorials out there, they're just doing select star or select everything, every row in the table. This is never done in practice, because it's not good for performance. You never want to query the database for every single row to be returned unless you're absolutely certain that you're never going to have more than, let's say, 100 or a couple hundred records. And even though you have a couple hundred records, you never want to load like 200 users on a UI page. It's just not a good user experience. So pagination is really important, and that's what I'm going to be teaching you today. So I hope you're excited, and let's get right into it. Usually when I build applications like this, like when I build the backend and the front end, I usually start with the backend and then move on to the front end. But this time I'm going to show you that you can actually start with the front end and then move to the backend. So what I want to do is to build the UI. So the first thing I want to do is to put together the UI. Now, if you're familiar with Bootstrap, you already saw that I was using Bootstrap. And I like to use Bootstrap because their classes are really convenient, so it doesn't take much for your application to look good. I'm gonna search for Bootstrap and press enter. And I'm just gonna click on the first link here and go to the docs and come down here. And I'm gonna just copy I'm gonna copy this right here. Okay, so this is just a very simple index file that you can start with, and it has the import for the CSS. So you can see they have the import for the CSS and the import for the JavaScript at the bottom. I don't think we're gonna use the JavaScript, but I'm just gonna edit anyway. So I'm gonna copy this, and then I'm going to open Visual Studio Code. So I want to be really transparent with the UI. I'm going to show you exactly that I'm not doing anything really fancy, and go line by line in the code with you so that you can see how I build this app. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to open Visual Studio Code. I'm going to bring it over. So this is Visual Studio Code. You can see here, blank, empty. I have no folders, no nothing. And I'm going to click on New File, and I'm just going to say it's going to be like a text file, and this is the file, right? And I'm going to paste this in there. So whatever we just copied, I'm just gonna paste it in there, and now we can save this file because it's not saved yet. You can see it says untitled. There's no name for the file. So I'm gonna do Control S, or you can do File, Save. It's the same thing, Control S, and it's gonna ask me to save the file. So I'm just gonna choose a location. I'm just gonna put it in my documents, and here I'm just gonna give it a name at the bottom. So I'm gonna call it index.html. It should already be HTML. As you can see here, the operating system detect that it was an HTML file, and I'm gonna save. So this is our index.html file. I can open this file in the browser so that you can see what it looks like and then work with it. So let's go back to Chrome, and I'm gonna need this, so I'm not gonna close it yet. And let's go to my document, and I wanna do index.html. So index.html, and this is our app for now. So hello world, we have the application already going. So the first thing we need, if you remember, we had a navigation bar. So I'm gonna click on the search here and then search for nav bar. So I'm gonna say nav bar, okay, and then I'm just gonna click on it and scroll down a little. I think the one that I'm using is that first one. So the first navbar example from Bootstrap, we can just copy this and paste it. I'm gonna copy this right here and then go back to Visual Studio Code. And inside of the body, instead of Hello World, I'm just gonna go ahead and paste this in there. Okay, so I pasted in there. You can see all the code is in there. And now if we go back and refresh, we have the navigation. It doesn't have the right colors yet, so I'm gonna go ahead and fix that right now. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. I want the background to be dark, so I'm gonna change the light to dark. So I'm gonna say dark, and I want everything else to be navbar. I think we have to do navbar dark. Okay, because I like the dark color better. And if we go back now and refresh, it looks more pronounced. You can see it better. So another thing I want to do is to not have the menu, like the actual menu and the navbar, stretch all the way across to the end of the screen. I want it to be like somewhere here using the container. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And the only thing we have to do really is to just change this from container fluid to container. And I'm just gonna remove this, delete it, go back, refresh. You see everything is aligned. The button also needs to be more pronounced. I want the button to be just green and not have a green outline. I just want the whole button to be green. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and we have the button outline success. All I have to do is to just remove the outline. And also while I'm here, I'm just gonna remove some of the stuff in this navigation. So I'm gonna keep home in the navigation, so that's the home LI, and I'm gonna remove everything else because I don't really need all this other stuff. So this disable, all this can go. Delete, and I'm gonna clean up a little right here. So now if we go back and refresh, okay, so that looks much better, looks more like what we had in the demo. So the next thing now we need to have is a table. So we need to have the table where we're gonna display all the users. So back to Bootstrap, and we're gonna search for table, and we're gonna click on the first link, and so this table should be fine. We can make it look nicer a bit later, but you can just click on the first one, and then we can add classes as we need. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So right after the navbar, which ends on line 28. So we can collapse this for now and go down here. So what I want to do is to put everything inside of the container. So I'm going to do that container, and that's going to create a div with the class container because I want things to be still inside of a container because the navbar items are in the container. So I want everything to be aligned. And then because we're using Bootstrap, of course, we need the row. And inside the row, I want everything to be in a column medium 12. And inside in there is where I'm going to paste the code. So I'm going to do Control V. We're going to put the table in there. So now if we go back and refresh. Okay, so you see the table is still inside of a container because we want everything to be aligned. So now I have to put the users list at the top here and push this down a little because right now it's too close to the navbar. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to expand the navigation again. And inside of the form, you can see the form here, the little form we have. At the top, I'm going to put search users for the placeholder. Okay, so that's the only change that I'm going to do in the form for now. And I'm going to collapse this back. Now, inside of this container, which is where we have our table, you can see the table starts here on line 32. Inside of the 12th column that I want to see on medium screen, I'm going to put MT for margin tab, and then I'm going to give it the value of 3. So this is a Bootstrap class that you can use now just to give a little bit of margin at the top. And you can also use MB for margin bottom. So margin tab 3, that's going to push it down a little bit. And then after that, I want, let's say an H3. So I'm going to do H3. And here we're going to put user list. Okay, you can put whatever you want, but I'm just going to put users list. And now if I refresh, so we get user list, and then we have the table, and then we have the navbar. Now, if we go back to Bootstrap and look at the table, I want the table to be table stripe. You can see every other row is a different color, and that's achieved by using this class here. So I'm going to just copy this class, go back to Visual Studio Code. At the table here, where we have the table class, I'm going to put a space here and then paste that in there. And go back to our app, refresh. You can see I have the same effect. Now, the next thing that we have left is the pagination. So the pagination that we're going to have here at the bottom. So let's go back to Bootstrap, and in here, we're going to search for pagination and click the first link here. And this is good for us. You can see this is really simple, just regular HTML elements and stuff, and then the Bootstrap classes on it. So nothing fancy, nothing crazy. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this and then open Visual Studio Code back. And at the bottom after the table, so here's the end of the table. At the bottom here, I'm going to put a space and paste that in there. So you see, I just paste the same code that I just copied. Now let's go back to take a look at this and refresh. Okay, so it's on the left, which is okay. We can move it on the right, but I'm just letting you know that if it's on the left, it's also okay. I just like it on the right. It looks better in my opinion, but you can keep it on the left if you want. That's not a problem. So let's go ahead and move all of this to the right because I like it on the right. Let's open Visual Studio Code. And the way we can achieve this is by going inside of the UL, so the unordered list. We can put another Bootstrap class, which is called justify. Oops, gonna move the cursor away. So justify dash content, and we want this to be end. So that's the end. And if we go back now, refresh, you can see now it's on the right. Now the other thing that I have is the little I guess arrows. There's a name for them which I don't know, but they're arrows pointing to the left and the ones pointing to the right. Which you see here, if I scroll down, you can see then the second example. That's what they're using. So instead of the words previous and next, they have this little icon here, and we can achieve this by just passing in this. So I can just copy this, go back to Visual Studio Code. So after we have next, so we're gonna have both. So we're gonna have next, and then we're gonna have, this is the end one. So I'm gonna paste this in there. And for the previous one, is this the same? So let's go back. So that's the one for next. So when we're going forward, so the one when we're going backward is different. So I'm gonna copy this as well. Actually, I need to, this is not in the right place. So let's just copy this entire LI. And go back, delete this. Just gonna do Control Z, and I'm gonna just paste this in there, just so that we don't have to type everything out. So this is how it's supposed to be like, and then here we're gonna say next, okay, so that it can be easier for us, less typing. Also gonna remove that one LI and just copy this LI and go back. And then paste it here instead as the first LI in the unordered list. And then here we're gonna say previous. So, previous, okay? And save and go back, refresh. Okay, so that looks better. So we have previous, next with the little icons. All of our pages are gonna be in between these two. So you saw everything about the UI for now. We're gonna get back to the UI, but for now, this is everything that we have. So all the UI is built in front of you, nothing really crazy. I just go in Bootstrap, copy things, and then just paste them in there. So that's what we need for the application. So we have everything we need. Now what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna start working on the back end and make sure that we get pagination working in the back end. So at this point, the UI is ready. There's nothing else we have to do here. Everything else is going to be dynamically generated. So we don't have to do anything else here. We'll add, a few more things here and there in the UI, but we need to have the actual Angular application running so that we can put in this logic. But for now, it looks exactly the way that it should look. So there's nothing else that we have to do here for now. So I'm going to start working on the back end, and I'm going to go here. I don't think we're going to use Bootstrap anymore. And I want to go to Spring Initializer. I can never spell that right. Oh, I actually did. So we're going to create a Maven project, and it's going to be a Java project. And version 2.71 is fine with me for Spring Boot. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fill out this information. So I'm going to put here, and the name is going to be Pagination. Yeah, everything else looks good. I think I have Java 18, so I'm gonna choose 18. I just upgraded to 18, I think a couple of days ago. And now I have to add the dependency. So we're gonna be building a web application or a web server. So we need the web, we need the MySQL connector. So MySQL connector, this is gonna allow us to connect to the MySQL server instance that I have running on my computer. And we need a data JPA, so JPA. And we need the Lombard, so that we don't have to write all the getters and setters. So the web dependency, the driver for MySQL, Spring Data JPA, and Lombok. And I'm gonna go ahead and click on generate, and this is gonna create a zip file. So I'm gonna go on my computer, I'm gonna unzip this file, and then I'm gonna open it in IntelliJ. So feel free to do the same thing. I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then I'm gonna be back with the application open in IntelliJ so that we can start working on it. So I have the application open in IntelliJ, and let's open up everything here just to make sure we're good. So we have the main application class. So this is the main application class, and we can run it now, but it's gonna fail because we don't have any database connection in the properties file. And while I'm here, I'm gonna go ahead and refactor this, give it a different name. I mean, I don't like properties file, so I'm gonna change it to YAML. So application.yaml, we're gonna be putting some configuration here for our connection to the database in just a minute. So what I want to do is to create the different packages that I'm going to need for this application. So I'm going to go inside of the main package here, right click, go to new, create a new package, and this is going to be the domain, and I'm going to create another one. This is going to be the repository, so repository, and then we need the resource, so let's do new package resource. And also we need the service, so new package service, and inside the service I'm going to create the implementation folder while I'm here. Servlet new, right click, new package, and implementation. So the service implementation, they're going to go inside of this folder, and I think that's all we need for now. So the first thing is we're going to start with our domain. So I'm going to create a new class, which is going to be the users that we're going to be managing. So that's going to be this. And we're going to put in some properties on these users. And let's collapse this from a room. So what we need is an ID. So we're going to say private long. We have an ID. We need a name. So we're going to say private string name and private string. We need an email. We're just filling in some data so that we have something to work with. Let's give him a status, and I'm also gonna give him private string. Let's do address, and we can give him a phone. So private string phone. And we can give them an image. I just pick a few things I think will make the UI look better. So image URL. So we give them a few things. So this is supposed to be string. Okay, so this is the user. Again, we're gonna let JPA take care of this entity for us. So we need to add some annotation. So the first one is going to be add entity. And we want the no args constructor, so no args constructor from Lombok. We need the all args constructor, so add. There it is. And I also want the super builder, so I'm gonna do add super builder. Super builder, and then I'm gonna do Control Shift. So it's gonna be Control Command O. And it's gonna remove any import that I'm not using. And I also want getters and setters. So I'm gonna say add getter and add setter. So we have setters and getters. We have entity for this for JPA to manage. And then we have the all args constructor, and then we have no args constructor here. And I want one last property, that's the JSON include, and I want this to be non-default. So none on the let's see, that's the second one. So what this is going to do is if the default value of any of these properties is what's being returned, then it's just not going to put it in the JSON object. It's just going to remove it altogether. So that's what this is doing. So now we're getting an error because we need to put the at ID on this. So we're going to say at ID, and also we need the generated value. So at generated value. And we want to set this to, let's say, identity. It's gonna be that one. Okay, so you can do static import for these because it looks nicer when they're statically imported. I'm gonna clean this up and do the same thing for the include, as you can see here. Put this down a little, come up here. and add the static import for this. Okay, and then I'm gonna do Control Command O just to clean and arrange the import. Now this is looking good. So this is the user class that we're gonna be managing or working with, and we're gonna page this. So that's why we're creating this class here. You can change this to whatever you want. I'm just using user as an example. So now we can create another one, which is gonna be the HTTP response. So I'm gonna call this HTTP response. And this is gonna have a few properties, so I'm gonna say protected. Let's do a string, and I'm gonna call this timestamp. Oops, it's timestamp. And we want another protected. That's gonna be an integer, and this is gonna be the status code. So the 200, 400, etc. And another protected, and that's gonna be of type HTTP status coming from Spring, and that's gonna be the status. And then I need the message. So if I send a message to the front end, which is gonna be represented as a string. And then lastly, I want the data. So here, I'm gonna pass in a map, and I want the map to be of anything. So I'm gonna put a question mark, another question mark, and then I'm gonna call this data. So the data is gonna be inside of a map so that we can pass as many pieces of information to the front end as we want. That's why I define the data like this. And every time I'm building an API, I like to make all my responses uniform. So that's why I'm creating this response. So every time I'm sending something to the front end, it's gonna have that format so that I can map it better in the front end as well. So keeping everything uniform and clean. But you don't have to do this. You can, send an array of users back to the front end. My array of users is gonna be inside of a map because I like to work with it better that way. And then I want to add data on this from Lombok, and also super builder. So we're gonna say super builder, and lastly I want the same thing. So let's copy this right here and then paste it here, because if something has the default value, then we don't want to return it. So for example, if this timestamp is null, then it's not gonna be included in the JSON when this is pushed forward to the front end as a JSON. So I think this is everything that we're gonna need in terms of our domains. We're gonna have the user that we're gonna be working with, and then we're gonna have the HTTP response. Next thing we're gonna do is to add the repository for this user class or entity. I'm gonna go into the repository here, right click on it and go to new Java class, and this is going to be the user repository. Enter, and we're going to extend the paging and sorting repository. So you have to be very careful here. So now we're not just extending JPA repository, but the paging and sorting repository, which is still JPA repository. But in addition to the stuff that you get with JPA, you also get some sorting and paging functionalities as well. So it's really just the same thing. And here again, we're gonna do the typical stuff, pass in the type we want to manage here, which is gonna be the user. And then we want to, let's go ahead and import this real quick from our domain. And then we're gonna pass in the type of the primary key here, which is long. So if I go inside of the user again, you see the type of the primary key is long. So this is all we have to do for now. We just have to define one method. So I'm gonna go down here, and this method is gonna return a page. It's gonna return a page of user, and I'm gonna say find, let me put a space here. So find by name containing. Okay, so this is how you define these names for these methods. And then here I'm gonna pass in the name. Okay, so the name has to exist inside of the user class. And then I'm gonna pass in pageable to make sure that this can be page. So we can pass in a page information in here if we want. And this is why we're extending the paging and sorting repository, because it's gonna allow us to pass in the page and paginate the response. And this is not supposed to be a class, it's supposed to be an interface. So that's why it's giving us all these errors. I'm gonna collapse these. So yeah, that's all we have to do. So we're extending still JPA repository, but another one called paging and sorting repository that's gonna allow us to page and sort things easier. And that's all we have to do here.
Of course, we can add more methods here, but for what I'm trying to teach you, this is going to be the method that we're going to use to sort and page things. Well, we're not going to be sorting, but you can also sort by passing in the direction of the sort in the pageable object here. But we won't be focusing on sorting, we'll be focusing on paging. So this is our repository. So now what we have to do is to create a service and then make the service use this repository. We're going to use this method in our user service so that we can pass that service to a controller where we're going to make the request. So I'm going to go into the service folder or package, create a new class, and I'm going to call it user service. Press enter, and this is going to be an interface. I keep forgetting to choose interface. And in here, we're going to say we want to return a page of user. So this is going to be a page of user, and let's just call it get users. And we're going to pass in the optional name. So they can possibly pass us a name, or they should pass us a name in this case. And then they can pass us the page that they want to see, and they can also pass us the size of the page. So the size of the page is going to be how many elements that we want in that page. And the int page is which page, like page 1, page 2, page 3. And the name is the name of the user that they're trying to look for, which is why we name this find by name containing. So this name is important. You have to name it that way, like find by ID, like find by name. This is how JPA is going to interpret this to create the query to query the database for you. And optionally, you can come in here and pass the at repository on top of this class. It's not really required, but if you want to have it on here, you can. So let's close this for now and close the user, close the response. So this is a service, all right? We're just going to have one method in there that's going to just call the method from the repository. So this is what we're going to inject inside of our controller, and you're going to see that in a minute. And what I'm going to do now is to just go and create the implementation. So create a new class, and this is going to be the user service IMPL, and that's going to be a class. And this is supposed to be, let's go ahead and rename this. Rename. So this is just the service refactor. Okay, so you can see the service is here, and then we're gonna create another package inside of the service called implementation, and we're gonna move the implementation in there. Factor. Okay, so that's a better structure. So the user service is here inside of the service package, and the implementation is inside of the service implementation package, as you can see here. So in here, first thing we have to do, we need to do some dependency injection. So I'm gonna pass in the annotation at service. Also, we can do transactional, but we're not gonna need it because we only have one method in there. And then we will have to do required args constructor, and also might need to log some stuff. So we're gonna do slf4j. Okay, so this is gonna allow us to log some things as requests are coming in. So in here, all we have to do is to provide the repository. So here we're gonna say user repository, give it a type user repository. So we have injected the user repository in here, and then now we have to implement the user service. So we're gonna say user service, and we have to implement that one method. Implement, click OK. All right, so we already have the repository here. All we have to do is to call the repository and then call our method. So find by name containing, and then we're gonna pass in the name, and then we need to pass in the page. So we can pass in the page requests of, and then you can see here we have different methods that we can call. So there's one where we can pass in the page and the size. There's one where we can pass in the page and the size and the sort. And so you can also sort, and you can tell it in which direction to sort or which properties to use to sort, but we're not going to be sorting. I mean, I don't always find sorting really useful for the applications that I've been building, but paging definitely really useful. So here we just have to pass in the page and the size because we're getting them from the request or from the method that's going to call this method. So whoever's going to call this method, they have to pass in the name and the page and the size, and we're going to pass it into the request. And here we can do a static import in this, and I'm going to do Control Command O to clean up the imports. And then before we forget, we can use the log. So we're going to say log.info, info, and we can say fetching users for page, whatever the page is, of size, whatever the size is, And then we're going to pass in those values. So that's going to be page size, just so that we can see some logs in the console. So fetching users for page, that's supposed to be four page, whatever the page is, of size, whatever the size is. So that's all we have to do here for the service implementation. And this is gonna do all the paging for us. We're gonna give it what page we want, the size of the page. If we have a name, we're gonna give it. If we don't have a name, we're gonna pass empty string here, and it's just gonna query the entire database. So that's all we have to do for the user service implementation. Let's go ahead and work on the controller now. So inside of the, I'm gonna collapse these. So inside of the resource, since this is a REST API, I'm gonna create a new class, and I'm gonna call it user resource. Enter. And we need to add some annotation on here. So the first one is gonna be REST controller. So REST controller, so that we can make this a REST resource. And we can add in the request mapping here. So request mapping, we're gonna say we want this to go to /. You can put like, you know, v1 / or v2 API, blah blah blah, but that's up to you. And then we need another one, which is the required args constructor. So required args constructor. Okay, so because we're gonna inject the service in here. And then at the top of the class, we're gonna do private final user service, which has only one implementation. So we're gonna inject it in this class. So we're gonna have one method in there. So we're gonna say public, and that's gonna return a response entity. So we're gonna say response entity coming from Spring Framework. And we want to return the HTTP response. So here we're gonna say HTTP response. That's coming from our domain. And let me collapse these. Okay. And we're just gonna call this get users. And here we have to pass in a few things. So the first thing is gonna be the name. So we're gonna say request param. I'm gonna show you a trick we're gonna do here. So I'm gonna make this an optional of string. So instead of just a string, I'm gonna make it an optional of string. So I'm gonna say it's an optional of string, and we want to call this the name. And we're gonna do the same thing for the, let's copy all this. We're gonna do the same for the page, and we're gonna do the same for the size. I'm gonna put these on the new line so you can see them better. New line. So this is gonna be an integer. So we're gonna say integer. Oops, integer. And that's gonna be the page. So name this page. And also this is gonna be an integer. Oops. Copy, paste. And this is gonna be the size. Okay. So this is all the request parameters that we're gonna be expecting from the user. And we can just return and a new response entity of OK. And inside we're gonna pass in the body here. So we're gonna say body, which is of any type. Inside of the body is where we're gonna call the HTTP response. So we're gonna call the builder, and then we're gonna pass in our information. So the first one is the timestamp. What we can do is to call now, and we can call to string on it. So to string. So the now, let's see if I can import this. More action, import static. I think that's the one that we want. Let me check, make sure this is correct. So Java local date time. So we want the local date time. That's the one that we want. So local date time now. Okay. And then we can call to string on it, give us the timestamp as a string. And then we can pass in our data. So the data, I'm going to give it a name, which is going to be a page. So that's the key inside of the map. And then the value is going to be the user service that get users. And then we're going to pass in the name, the page, and the size. Now, if we get null, this might throw us an error. I didn't test it, but I'm pretty sure if we send null, it might throw an error. I didn't test. So to avoid this, which is why I'm using the optional, we're gonna do or else so that we can supply something else. So if they don't pass in the name, we're gonna pass in empty string. And we're gonna do the same for the page. So or else. So if they don't pass us a page, then the default page is 0. And we're gonna do the same for the size. We're gonna say pass in the size if there is one, or else I'm gonna start with 10. Okay, so That's why using an optional is really important here, because we can pass in default values if these values don't exist. And then after that, we can pass in our message. So I'm gonna say message, and here we can say something like users retrieve or something. So retrieved, and we can pass in the status. So status, I'm gonna pass in okay. Okay, so that's coming from Spring Framework. Do a static import on that. And then we're gonna pass in the status code. So status code, we're gonna pass in the okay, that value. And lastly, we have to call the build. Okay, this is how we're gonna create the object here.
And we're getting an error here because this is supposed to be a map. So I'm gonna pass in a map dot of, and then open and close. So all this is supposed to be inside of the map, and we can do a static import for this as well. All right,
so now all we have to do is to annotate this method. So here I'm gonna say at, this is gonna be a get mapping, and we wanna make this go to /users, for example. So users. Okay, so that's all we have to do for the controller. We're only gonna have one method in there that's gonna retrieve all of the users per page. So we're gonna pass in a name or empty, page or 0 or page 0, the size or 10, because we want to get 10 users if they don't pass in any size. And that's pretty much everything we have to do for the user resource. The next thing we have to do is to put the configuration for the database so that when we run the application to test it, it doesn't fail. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go inside of the application.properties file, or YAML file in this case, and I'm just gonna go ahead and paste the configuration. So I'm pretty sure you guys are very familiar with this configuration already. I'm changing the port to 8085, and then I'm setting the URL for the database. You can see here I have a local IP address. That's because I have a computer, like a tower, that I use for experiments when I'm doing stuff and I don't wanna do them on my computer. So on that computer, I have Docker running, and I have an instance of MySQL. So that's why I'm using this IP address of that computer. But in your case, most likely it's gonna be localhost. So don't worry too much about this. It's just another computer that I have running on my network. And then password, username, and some other configuration for Hibernate and stuff. So this is really not anything complicated. That's something you probably have seen before. So I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but we're just passing in the database information. So if I close this and go ahead and run the application, hopefully everything works. So let's run it. Okay, it looks like it's building itself. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, looks like it ran fine. We didn't get any errors or anything. And I think I set this to update. So the DDL update will not crash my database because I manually put data inside of the database. And I'm gonna show you how I did this. So application is running. We can go ahead and test it. We're gonna do that in a second. So I want to show you this Macaru website, and that's what I use to generate the information that I want for the users to insert inside of the database. So instead of, go to the application class and then use the repository to insert users, I just used this tool here, and then I generated 100 users. So for example, if I do this and I say I want SQL, and then I'm going to call this user, for example, what I did is I just click on preview, and then it gives me all the SQL queries and some dummy data. And you can choose, for example, like let's say I wanted this to be the image underscore URL. And then here I can choose, for example, image, and then you can see it says dummy image URL. So then when I do preview, then we get a bunch of dummy images in here. So this is how I generated all this data, and I'm gonna show you that. I'm gonna bring up my MySQL workbench. So I generated this user.sql. I just put that first line so that we can use our database. So using the Pagination database, and then here's all the statement. So all of this is gonna go inside of the database, and that's 100 of them. You can see we have 100 lines of code here. And then the other thing I did is you see that I'm using this dummy image, and I didn't like this. So what I did is in here, I was doing some experiment. I just changed some of the statuses of the users, and then I changed the image URL of the users as well. So I just used the random user API. I can copy this and show you that as well. And then I created a random number from 0 to 100, and then that JPGA, because that's how these API generate images. So if I go back now and paste that in there and go to user photos, and I can pick anyone here. Let's pick this guy and copy it. And if I paste it in here, you see it's min and then a number. I've seen that the number is between maybe 100, which is why I do the concat in my SQL. So I'll show you that right now. So I put the beginning of the string, some random number between 0 to 100, and then .jpg, which will give us a string similar to this. And this is how I was able to change all of the user images to use real images. And I did the SQL safe update. I disabled it because when you're updating stuff, you need to pass in a condition, and I was not passing any condition. You can see I'm setting the image URL to a new image. I don't use the where clause to pass in a condition. And if you don't do that, my SQL is gonna complain. So I just disable this so that I can update all the pictures. So now we have data in our database, and I can show that. Let's open this panel. So here's the table. And if I select everything, bring it up a little, you can see we have 100 users in here. Okay, so we have enough data that we can use to just test this out. So I'm gonna close all this. Don't need this, don't need this. Let's open Postman. So we're gonna send a request to, that's gonna be localhost. I'm gonna select that first one, change this to 8085. And we want to go to users. So if I go to users, we should get the first page, and we should get 10 users in that page because we didn't pass in any request parameters. So if I send the request, you can see we get the response, and we have 10 users. So 9, 10, ID 10. And then if I move this up a little more, you can see the page information. So we see the total elements is how many we have in total in the table. So that's 100. Total pages, we have 10 pages. And then the size of this specific request is 10 because we're requesting 10. And then we have a bunch of other things about sorting, if this is the first element or not. So all the other information about the page that we're not really using right now. So now we can test to pass in some stuff. So if I put a question mark and I put name equal AN, which is something that I know exists, that we should have at least 3 pages. So if I send this request, you see now I get the first user, then the third, then the 8th user, then the 11th user, 18th user. So I know that the sorting is working because all these users have AN in their name. And then I can say, give me, so this is gonna give us 10. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. By default, it's 10 because we pass in the size of 10. So what we can do here, we can say, we put an end sign, and then we say size equal, say 3. Okay, so now instead of giving us 10, it's gonna give us 3 because we're passing in the size here. We can send the request again. So now we have 1, then 3, and then 8. So we have 3 here. So by default, it's giving us page 0. And how do I know this? It's right here in the page information, page number 0, because that's the default we set in the backend. If I want the second page, I can put another end, and then I say page, and I say equal page 1 because it starts at 0. So page 1 now, if I send the request, it's gonna give me 3 again, but the next 3. So 11, 18, 21, and then there's no more. And then it tells me that the page size is 3, so 3 element in the size, and then the page number is 1. So I can say I have 8 pages, so I can go up to page 7. So I can come here and say, bring me the last page. It starts at 0, so that's why I have 7 and not 8. Send the request. You can see we have 1 user in the last page, and we have, is it the first page? No. Is it sorted? No. So we have a bunch of information here. Number 7, size 3, total element is 22. So you see that we have all the information that we need to sort the information and page it and size it the way that we want. I can go back and say, give me page 6 now, send the request. Now it's going to give me the 3 before that guy, and then the rest of the paging information. And I can copy this, go back to the browser. Since it's a GET request, we can use the browser. Paste that in there and zoom in a little. So I'm not using my account. You can see here I'm browsing as a guest. That's why this doesn't look really cool, because I have an extension when I'm using my account. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring another session just so I can show you this. So I'm gonna bring it over here, and this is what it will look like. So I'm using my account now. I have this alien as my picture. So you can see now I just pasted in the same request. You can see now we have all the information in a nicer way, but it's the same information. So pagination is working and the search is working. And this is really everything that we have to do for the backend. And it's really not a lot of code, but as long as you know what you're doing, then it should be pretty easy for you to set up the backend using the paging and sorting repository that is provided by Spring. So that's pretty much everything that we have to do for the backend. Application is running fine. All the logs are coming through. So everything is good. I'm just going to keep this running. And then what we're going to be doing next is to work on the front end. Now you see that because I'm using the Pageable, we have all of the information that we need to manipulate the UI or the front end to send requests with different page and different size. And if we're searching, we pass in a name, we should be able to build this UI. But it can be a little tricky. And I'm going to walk you through everything line by line. So let's go ahead and start working on the front end. I'm going to go ahead and create the Angular application for now. And I'm going to keep the backend running. And then I'm going to bring Visual Studio up and I'm going to open the terminal and see if we can generate the Angular application. So I'm going to navigate to my documents. That's where I'm going to keep the application. And then I want to do, I need to do CLS here. And let's do ng new so that we can generate the Angular application. And I'm going to call it Pagination app. Okay, so the backend is called Pagination. So I'm just going to call the front end Pagination app. And I'm going to press enter. And this is going to take some time because it has to install a bunch of dependencies. I'm going to just say yes to this question and be cool with CSS and just going to let this finish. And then once all the dependencies have been installed and everything, then I'm going to go ahead and open the application with Visual Studio Code. Okay, everything has been installed. I'm gonna go ahead and do CLS and do code dot and also do ng serve so that I can serve the application. Well, actually, I need to navigate inside of this Pagination app folder. And then here is where I'm gonna say code dot and ng serve. So it's gonna open a new Visual Studio Code. Well, I guess I don't need to do that. Let's go ahead and just stop this. So I'm gonna say Control C here. Just gonna say no. Control C. I'm just gonna delete these and open the other window that I had. Make it full screen. Okay, so this is the app and we're gonna run it inside of the same terminal. So here I'm just gonna say ng serve. Okay, so we're not gonna worry too much about this. I'm just gonna let it run, make sure it's successful, and then I'm gonna close the terminal panel here. So let's just give it a few moments. Okay, so everything is working. We can check it on localhost 4200. We're gonna do that in just a second, but I'm just gonna close this for now. So this is a brand new Angular application, and the first thing that I wanna do is to put the UI code that we created in the beginning of the course. So we're going to put the HTML file in there so that when we go to the browser, we can see the HTML that we created, the index file that we created. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is the index file. I have it open in the browser. I also have it open in Visual Studio Code. So I have it open here and we're just going to copy everything over. So the first thing that I want to do is to copy the Bootstrap import. So the CSS import. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. And I'm just going to go to the source app. And we want to go to the app component.html because this is the main UI page of the application. And then I'm going to select everything here except the router outlet. We can remove the router outlet because we're not using any routing. And just want to show you that I clean this. And we're going to go inside of the index and we're going to import that right here. So I'm going to go down there and import this. And back to the index file, we also have to import the, which we're not really using, but I'm just showing you in case you want to set up your application with Bootstrap in that specific way, because there are many different ways you can import Bootstrap in your application. Back in this index.html file, we're going to go at the bottom right after app root, which is where all the elements are going to be put in dynamically. And then we're going to paste that in there. Okay, so that looks good. And I'm just going to fix this as well. I'm going to name it Pagination app with uppercase. So at this point, we should have Bootstrap in our application because we have the imports. So I'm going to close that. Now we need to pass in the actual content here. So I'm going to scroll up and inside of the body is everything that we need. Remember the index.html already has the document format, so it has the doc type, HTML and everything. So everything we're going to be working with is going to be inside of the body. So we can copy everything inside of the body here. Well, actually I don't need this. Just copy this. So we don't need the body, we don't need the script. Why? Because inside of this index.html we already have the body. So we're just working inside of this app root here, which is going to be loaded dynamically. So I hope that makes sense. Now we're going to go inside of the app component.html. At the top, we can put all of this code. Okay. Like I said, we can remove the router outlet because we don't have any router, but just it doesn't bother me here. So with all these changes, if we go into the browser now, remember the app has to be running. So if I do control backtick, we can see that the app is running on 4200. If I scroll up a little, you can see it right here. So I can just copy this link and then go back to the browser, open a new tab and paste it in there and go there. You can see it looks exactly the same. So now we have our Angular application with the UI the way that we want it to be. So this is what we created. This is the static index file. This is the Angular file we're going to work with for the application and then set up variables and all kinds of fancy stuff. Okay, so I don't need this anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and close this. Now we're going to be working on this application and put in all the functionalities. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and the first thing we need to do is to create a service, and we need the service to make HTTP requests. Now we don't need to create a service for that. It's just the way that the framework is set up. Usually whenever you need to make some HTTP requests, you want to have a dedicated service to do that for you. And keeping with the good practice or the way that the designer of Angular wanted a framework to be used, then we're just going to go ahead and create a service so that we can make HTTP requests to the backend API that we created. But you don't have to do that. You can put all your logic to the request inside of the app component here. We're just not going to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is to do Control C here and then do CLS to clear the screen. And then I'm going to do NG for the Angular CLI generate. And then I want a service. We're going to call it user service. I usually like to put services inside of a folder. Again, you don't have to do that. If you want to put it in a folder, you just pass in the folder name and then the / and then the name of the service. In this case, it's going to be user. And what the Angular CLI is going to do is it's going to put the rest of the name for you. So that's going to be user service.ts, all the files that it's going to create. Now, I also don't want the test file because we're not testing here. So I'm going to pass this flag skip test. So skip test. So we're skipping all the tests, so we don't want the test file, and then we're generating the service. So I'm going to press enter on that. Okay, so you see that it created this file called user.service.ts, and it's inside of this service folder. So I'm going to do the up arrow key twice, maybe more than twice, and then run the application again. So ng serve, and then I'm going to do control backtick just to hide the open terminal. So now we can go inside of the service and here, and the first thing we need to do, we need to import the HTTP client. So I'm going to say private HTTP, that's the name of it, and it's of type HTTP client. This is not being imported, so let's do import, and this is the HTTP client. So it's supposed to come from @AngularCommon/HTTP. So this is where the package lives. So that's what we want. And then the other thing I have to do before you can use the HTTP client, you have to import the HTTP client module so that you tell the entire Angular app that you're going to be using the HTTP client. And to do this, you do that in the app module, which is the main module that we have. So I'm going to go in here, put another comma, and then add another import. You can see we're already importing the browser module and the app routing module. So now we need the HTTP client module. You can see it coming up here. Now we have the HTTP client module. We can use the HTTP client inside of the service. So I'm going to go ahead and close the app module because we don't need to be in there anymore. And then I'm going to collapse the file explorer or the panel here by just clicking here or just do Control B, I believe. So that should close that. So now we need to create a method that's going to call the backend and then retrieve the page of data. So this is all we have to do. So I can put a comment here. I can say make call to the backend API to retrieve page of users. Okay, so that's all we're gonna be doing here. Then I'm gonna put this in the comment. So that's what we have to do. So now I can go down here and then I can do get users, which is gonna be the function. Remember, this is gonna take a name. oops, that's the Java syntax. So we want a name passively, right? And then if they don't pass a name, then we're going to set the default to empty string. So the same thing that we were doing in the backend. So they can pass in a name. If they don't pass in a name, then we're going to keep empty string. And then the page, which is going to be a number. So the page number, like page 1, page 2, page 3, we can set that as a default for 0. So if they don't pass a page, then the default is going to be 0. And of course, the third argument is a size, which is going to be a number. And of course, we're going to give it a default of 10 because we're loading 10 users by default. So now what we have to do, we can say this is going to return an observable of any for now, because we don't have anything defined for the page. So this is going to be any, and then in here, we're going to have the body of the function. And we do return this.http.get because we're making a GET request. The GET request is also a generic, as you can see here. It takes a type. We're going to pass in any for now. We're not going to keep any. I'm just going to do that for now, just so we can see something in action. We can pass in the APIs. I can say, for example, I'm going to put backtick and then $, open and close curly braces. And I'm going to say this.API URL or server URL, and we want to go to /users. So we're gonna go to /users. Now remember, we have to pass in the query parameters. So we put a question mark, and then I'm gonna put another $, open and close curly braces. But before that, we have to pass in the key. So the key is gonna be name equal, and then we pass in the name here. So we're gonna say name, and we're gonna do that for the page. So we're gonna put a int sign, and then we're gonna say page equal $, open and close, we pass in the page. So we're just putting the URL together by using variables and actual string. And to do this, the easiest way is to just use backticks. So using a string literal. And that's what we're doing here. And then lastly, I'm going to do end. We're going to pass in the size, which is the key. The value is going to be whatever they pass into the function. So $, open and close, and then we're going to pass in the size. So size. So this is how we format our URL so that it can look exactly the way that we want it to look. And then now we just have to define this guy here, and I'm just going to set it to the local host. So we're going to say local host :8085. So this is the backend. So that's the default of the backend. So we're going to put http :/. And we can make this private read only. Okay, and let's give it the type here. This is supposed to be an equal sign. So the type of this server URL is a string, and this is the default value for it. And it's read only, so it can be changed inside of the class. So this is what you would typically see whenever you see that people are using Angular and they're trying to define a function to make an HTTP request to a backend API. That's typically what you would see, which is a procedural approach. But what I want to do is to take a reactive approach. So I just want you to see what you would typically see when people are using Angular to make backend API calls. When they're creating a service and then they're making a function to make a call to a backend, this is what it would look like. But we're going to take a different approach, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. Instead of creating a function that we can call like this, I'm gonna directly create an observable. So I'm gonna copy this and probably comment it out. If you guys want, you can use it. And also, by the way, there's nothing wrong with this approach. I just prefer the other approach that I'm gonna show you. And then I'm gonna give me some room here, and I'm gonna paste this. And I'm gonna call it users because it's an observable of users. I'm gonna put a $sign at the end. So usually when you define observables, you put the $sign in the end. That's how you denote an observable. And then I'm going to set it equal to the observable, and just going to be the same thing. Going to remove these and remove the return as well. And then just set it equal to an arrow function. So just like that. So it's really the same thing. If I can put this on the no line, so you see that I'm just returning the same thing. It's just in a different way. I just put it in a different format. So instead of a return, I put an arrow function here, and then I pass in the same parameters to the function. I just give it a different name of users because now it's an observable and it's pointing to this other observable. Because the get users here, or the get method here, is returning an observable. And we can see that if I press Control and click on this get here, you can see it returns an observable observable of whatever type that we pass in here. Okay, so since this is returning an observable, since we're using an arrow function here, which is pointing to this observable, so therefore this users is an observable as well. And that's really all we have to do. It's really just the same thing. I just prefer the other approach. So now what I want to do is to get rid of this any here, because we're using TypeScript and we really don't want to be using any unless we really have to. So I'm gonna go and create another folder here inside of the app folder, and I'm gonna call it interface. You can call it something like domain or something, but I'm just gonna call it interface. I prefer interface. And then inside of there, I'm gonna create a new file. So right click new file, or just click on this icon up here. And I want to create the API-response.ts. Oops, I put TA. Rename TS. Okay. And then inside of this file, I'm just gonna export an interface. So I'm gonna say export interface, and then I'm gonna call it API response. This is gonna mirror exactly what we have in the backend. So just to make sure you can make the connection in an easier way, let's go back to the backend and let's go look at this response. I'm gonna collapse this for now. So remember, we have all of these values in our HTTP response, which is what we're gonna get. And the data is what's going to contain the page of all the users, which is going to be here. Okay, so I'll copy all of the properties that we have on this class, and then I'm going to go here and paste them in. Okay, because we want to map everything here. And then I'm going to select the first protected, do Control D until I get them all selected. And I'm going to press delete, delete. I'm going to select all of the string, do the same, delete, delete. Select all of the, well, I only have one int. So I'm going to delete that as well. In this map, which is the data, I'm just going to delete all of this as well. So now I'm going to give this type. So the timestamp is going to be a string. I'm going to copy this. The status is also going to be a string. The message is going to be a string. The status code is going to be an int. So I can put number here. Okay, and then the data is going to be an object. So I can do colon, open and close curly braces, and that's going to contain a page, and that's going to be of type, let's say T. So whatever type we're going to pass to this API response, that's the type this is going to be. And then I can define the T here so that it can be passed out. So that's our response. We have a timestamp, status code, the status, the message if we pass any message, and then the data, which in this case is going to be a page of whatever type we pass in here. Or in our case, it's going to be a page of users instead of a user. So now let's go ahead and create the user as well. So in here, I'm going to say new file, and this is going to be the user.ts because we need to map everything. So export interface user, open and close curly braces. What we have on the user is an ID, that's a number. We also have the name, that's a string. We have the email, that's also a string. Status, which is also a string. And then we have the address, also a string. We have the phone, another string. And lastly, we have the image URL, also another string. So this is the user. Pretty easy and straightforward. It's the same user that we had in the back end. We're just mirroring that in the front end so that we can map into this whenever we get the response back from the API. And lastly, we need the actual page. So I'm going to go inside of here again, click on the no file icon, and then we're going to call this page.ts. Okay, so this one is going to be pretty interesting, and I'm going to show you how I did this very quickly. So let's go back to the backend. So click on run. So the backend is running. We left it running. What I'm going to do is to just go ahead and see what the response looks like when we get it in the browser. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy that and paste that in here. So let's go back here, open a new tab, and I can actually copy all this stuff, paste it in here. And I need to change the port, so 8085/users. Okay, so this is the information that we get. So I'm gonna see if I can make this a little bigger. So we have a lot of information here. So we can't really see this very clearly. So I'm gonna copy it and then open a session with my user because I have an extension that makes these look pretty, and I'm gonna move it over here. Okay, so this is the response that we have. Remember, we're mapping the timestamp, the status code, the status, and the message. Now what we have to map is the page that's gonna be inside inside of the data that we define in the HTTP response. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this stuff. I'm not going to include the last one because if you scroll up all the way to the top, you see that I'm not including that one as well. Actually, I have to skip 2 of them. The bottom, I don't need that last one. And then I'm going to copy all this. Okay. And then I'm going to say export interface page and then open and close curly braces. And then I'm going to paste this in there. Now we're going to have to clean this up. This contains the actual values and we don't want the values. So let's scroll all the way up. So the page is this page that we're defining, which means we don't need to have this page again here. So I'm going to remove that first line here in line 2 and go to the bottom, which means we don't need that one either. Okay. So now what we have to do is to just go up here. We know we're going to have a content, which is going to be an array. And this array is going to be an array of users, as you can see here. So this is pretty easy to define. So I'm going to select the beginning of the array to the very end of the array. So all of the users inside of it, delete it. And then I'm going to say this is going to be an array of users. So I'm going to say user array and then import the user. Okay, so this is going to be the content. Now I want to remove all of these quotes, so I'm gonna do that later because when you have the quotes it helps you because you see exactly what you're doing. But once I'm done, then I'm gonna use the Visual Studio search and replace, and then I'm gonna replace everything here. So now we have the empty, which is going to be a Boolean. So we can select all of the true. So select everything that's true here. And then we're going to change it to the type, which is a Boolean. And we're going to do the same for false. So select all the false here with Control D. And then change it to the actual type, which is the Boolean, not the value. So for all of these, they're going to be numbers. So everything that's 0, 10, 100, all of these are going to be numbers. So we're going to say number, and I'm going to see if I can just copy this, do it as quickly as I can. Select all of these, paste, and I'm gonna remove that extra 0, and I'm gonna select all of the 0, Control D. Okay, I only have 2. Change it to number. So now I know there's a first, which is a Boolean, last, which is a Boolean, and then I have the array of users here. So now I'm gonna select this double quote, do Control F, paste it in there, and then I'm gonna say replace with nothing, and then I'm gonna click on replace all. Let's format this document a little. So this is the page. This is what the page looks like. It's going to have something called content, which is going to contain the data, which is going to be an array of users. And it's going to have pageable, sort, offset, page number, total elements, total pages, all the other things that we need. This is giving me an error. I'm going to just delete it and import it again. Import, gonna replace them with single quote. That's nicer. So this is the page. This is what the page looks like. This is the format of the page. Now we can go back to the API. So in here, we can pass in this data, but we're not gonna do it here because we make this API response a generic. So we can just pass it whenever we're gonna use this information. So I'm gonna copy this, go back to the service. I know this is gonna return an observable of my API response, and for my data, so we're going to have an API response, which is going to contain timestamp, status code, status message, and the data, which is of type page, which is a page that we just created here. Inside of the page is where we have the array of users. Everything is nicely mapped, and we can step into all of these objects if we want, because we know that whenever we get a response from the API, then everything is going to be mapped into this object here. I hope that makes sense. And I'm also going to make the same changes in the one that's commented out. So I'm going to select the 2 any's here, pass in the actual type. Okay, so if you want to use this function, feel free to use it. But in my case, I'm just going to use an observable here. So now let's go ahead and start using this observable here so that we can see what we get when we make the request to the backend. So let's go into the app component, and I'm just gonna right click and close all of these tabs. We're gonna go inside of the app component.ts. So the first thing I wanna do is to define a state for the application. So I'm gonna call this users state with a $, because it's also going to be an observable. So I'm going to say the type is an observable. And remember, the observable is a generic, so I need to give it what type of observable this is going to be. So I'm going to just put in a literal object in there. What I want is an app state. So the app state is going to be a string. And then I need the app data. So the app data, I'm not always going to have data, so I'm going to make it optional. And then I'm gonna say this is gonna be of the same type that's coming from the response. Okay, so we can go inside of the service and here, scroll over a little, just copy this response. So this is the type of response or the data that we're gonna be expecting. I'm gonna paste it here. And then we can possibly get an error. also optional because I just said possibly. We're not gonna have an error every time, and this is gonna be of type HTTP error response. So this is technically the application state. I'm just calling it the user state because I know I'm gonna be working with a bunch of users, but I usually name the state whatever component that they would be in. So if we had routing and I had like a users component, that would make total sense because we have the user state, but you get the point. Now let's go ahead and import all these so the error is going to go away, and we get another error here. And if I put this on here, you see that TypeScript is giving me an error. It says, hey, this is not initialized. So for example, it wants us to say this can be equal null or undefined or something like that, and I usually don't want to do this. I feel like it's a little bit annoying or too strict, so I'm going to show you how you can make TypeScript stop bothering you. I don't want TypeScript to be so strict with me, but if you want, you're going to have to say this can be whatever you define or undefined, for example, or null, and then you're gonna have to say it's equal by default undefined. So if I do this now, if I scroll to the left, you can see it doesn't complain anymore. But I don't know, I don't like to do this. I want to just define whatever I want to define, and I don't have to give it an initial value. So that's why it's complaining here. So what I want to do is to just disable this because I don't want to have to deal with this. So I'm gonna go in here, go to the tsconfig.json. So right after the strict, I'm gonna put another property here, which is the, I think it's strict property initialization, and then set this to false because I don't want strict initialization. And while I'm here, I want to pass in another one called strict null checks. Okay, so that one, I'm gonna pass it to false. Okay, so I like to have these two defined in my TS configuration. So I'm gonna close this. Now if we go back, can see that I don't have to set it to anything and it doesn't complain anymore. So now moving on, the next thing we have to do is to define a constructor, and then we're gonna do dependency injection. So we're gonna call the user service of type user service. Make sure this is imported, and this is gonna be the constructor, and we want to make the request as the component is loaded or is initialized. So for this, we're gonna have to implement the ng on init, which doesn't take any parameters, and it returns void. All right, so all the code is gonna go in there, and we also have to make sure we say we're gonna implement on init. Okay, this is coming from core, so Angular core, and this is on init, capital I. Okay, so on init. So this function is going to be called as soon as the component is loaded. So once that happens, then we want to make the HTTP call. So in here, we're going to say this user state. So I'm going to set my state equal to something. In this case, that's going to be the service.users. Remember, this is returning an observable. So on initial page load, we're not going to pass in any of these parameters, okay? Because we want to load everything. For page 0, we want to load the first 10 users. So this by default is going to be an empty string, which is why I'm able to call the function just like this without passing any parameters. And then in here, we're going to pipe this. So what I want to do, the first thing is I want to map this response. So I'm going to say map whatever response that I'm going to have. Remember, this is going to be of the same type. So I can copy this right here, paste it here. So the type of the response is going to be of type API response. And then inside it's going to have a page. And then I can say, whenever I get a response, I want to execute some code. In this case, I'm just going to say, first thing is I want to console.log this response. That's the first thing I want to do, because we want to be able to see, response. We want to see this response. So I'm going to log it, and then I want to return the state that we defined here. Remember, we can't return this HTTP response because we have to return something that matches this type here that we defined. So to do this, I'm going to return, and in here, we can pass in an object. So I'm going to say open and close curly braces, and I'm just going to copy all of this and then paste it in here. The app state, now we have to give it a value. I'm gonna say the app state is going to be app underscore loaded. So I know the data has been loaded because I'm able to get the response. I didn't get an error. App data is going to be the response. So I'm gonna copy this and paste it here. And we're not gonna get any error, because if we get a response, then there's no error. And I'm gonna remove this question mark. All right, so that's the response. The other thing I want to do is after the map, so you can see the map begins here. And actually, we need to enclose this in parentheses. So the map begins here and it ends all the way at the bottom here. So what I want to do is put another operator here, which is called start with. because whenever this is loading, we make the request to the backend. We want to start with a state. So here we can pass in a different object. So I'm gonna copy all this, paste it in here, and we're gonna change this to loading. And we don't have any app data, we don't have any errors. Okay, so the application is just loading. And then lastly, if we get an error, we're gonna catch the error. So we're gonna call catch error. And if there's an error, we're gonna say the error is gonna be of type, remember, HTTP response. So we're gonna copy this, paste it in here. So if there is an error, then what are we gonna do? We're gonna say, we can just straight ahead, just return an error function here. Like we don't need any return or anything like that. And then I'm gonna return an observable of some kind of value here. When you call of, then it returns an observable. And then in here, we're gonna pass in something else here. Paste this. So I'm gonna say app error. And then the error is gonna be the error. So I can remove the data. If there's an error, there's no data, and then pass in the error like this. And we're getting a bunch of errors because we need to import all these things. So let's import this from our XJS and import of from the same package. So first we need to import this error, and we need to import this from. Okay, so it's imported as you can see up here. And I'm gonna remove this, and I think we need the closing parenthesis here. All right. So that looks good. I'm just gonna go ahead and format the document so that everything can be aligned. And all of this needs to be inside of the parent parentheses as well. All right, so we're gonna catch the error, which is gonna be of type HTTP error, and then we're gonna return an observable that's gonna have the app state error, and then we're gonna have the error inside of the same state as well. Format this one more time. Okay, so this is what we have. So whenever now we go to the home page, we should have this log here, and we'll be able to see that we actually get the page from the backend. So let's go ahead and check that out in the browser. So before we go to the browser, I'm gonna do control backtick. We had errors because we were like writing code and stuff. So you can see at the bottom, everything was successful. So I'm gonna do control backtick. So if we go to the browser now, you would expect that we're gonna see this console log. So let's go ahead and check it out and see what happens. So I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna right click, open the developer tool, go to the console, clear, zoom in a little, and then I'm gonna refresh. So you see that we didn't get any errors or anything like that, but we still didn't see the log that we have in the code. Why do you think this is happening? Why we're not seeing our log and the code here in the console? Well, if you said that is because we didn't subscribe to the observable, you're absolutely correct. Let's go back to the code. So if we go back to the code again, you see that we have an observable here. Remember, if you don't subscribe to an observable, it's never gonna fire. So even though we have this nice code written out here, this code is never fired because there's no one that's subscribed to this observable here. So for us to be able to see this code in action, or for this code to run, at least we need one subscriber that would be interested in this data so that the observable can fire itself. So that's why we didn't see anything in the browser. So to do this, let's go ahead and open the HTML file, and I'm just gonna do a quick demo here. So I'm gonna put 2 double curly braces, and I'm gonna say user state. I'm not gonna type this all out. I'm just gonna copy it here, and I'm gonna say user state. Oops. And then I'm gonna say async. That's how you subscribe in the UI. And if we want to see everything, I'm gonna put another pipe, and I'm gonna say JSON. So this is gonna show us the state in JSON format. So the async is subscribing to this observable, and the JSON is gonna display it in the JSON format. So now if we go back, you see now we get an error, which means the code was executed, but we get an error because course has been blocked for this 4200 to the backend because they're not on the same domain. So now you can see the call is actually being made, but the backend is failing us because we have a course issue here because the browser enforces this course from different origin rule. So because the front end is on localhost 4200 and the backend is on localhost 8085, then the browser say, hey, you can't communicate with this other domain because it's a different domain. So we just have to put a configuration in the backend code to tell the backend that, hey, if you get a request coming in from localhost 4200, just accept it, and then it will go through. But you can already see from the request that was made that we get exactly what we were looking for. So this is the URL that was created. So /users, !, name equal empty. So we don't have anything there. And then the page is 0, and then the size is 10. So we know that our URL is being formatted correctly. So hopefully the call will be successful whenever we fix this course issue. So let's go ahead and fix the course issue in the backend. And then we're going to come back here, refresh the page, see if we can see the data. So let's go back to the backend code, close all these. We want to go inside of the main application file. And this is something that I usually do every time I'm working in the backend and building API. So I'm just gonna go ahead and paste it. So if you've seen anything that I've done before in the past with Spring Boot, with the Angular in the front end, then you know this configuration is something that you're gonna do every single time. And it's just a simple course configuration. We're just telling the browser or telling the backend what requests from who they should accept. Okay, so I'm just saying accept requests from localhost 4200, and then make sure everything is imported at the top. I think IntelliJ should have done this for me. Okay, so that's all we have to do. Just put the course configuration. I mean, you can go through this code, but it's gonna be the same every time. You might have to make a few changes here and there, but the bulk of it is going to be the same, because you're just going to say, hey, this is what I'm allowing in the backend, and the browser is going to read these headers and it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to allow 4200 to go through. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the run and then click to rerun the application. So the backend application, and let this come up. Okay, should be pretty fast because we don't have a big application here. Go back to the front end. Now let's see what we get. So if I go ahead and refresh, you can see we get the data. Now this is huge. That's because we're printing out this big object in the header. So we're gonna put that somewhere else. But you can see now that we get the response. Okay, so we get the response, which is the timestamp, status code, status message, and then we have the data, which contains the page. You can see here, which is an object. If I extend this, extend the page, we have the content, which is the 10 users. You can see here, and then we have all of the information about the page. And this is the information that we're going to be using to create this pagination that you see at the bottom here. The same object that you're looking at here is the same object that I'm showing here, but this is all black. And let's go ahead and fix that just so we can see something here. Open this. So instead of putting this in the nav bar, just gonna remove it here. Let's put it like at the top of the table here, and then go back to the app. Okay, so you can see here, this is what we have. So, and I'm gonna show you again, if we put a delay on the back end, we're gonna have a different app state, because as of right now, if I can zoom in a little more, the app state is uploaded, app data is the entire response that we get, and we don't have any errors. Okay, so everything seems to be working fine, no errors or anything. So now we can start using this data to show something on this table right here. And that's gonna be pretty easy because you can see that we can already see everything that we have here. Now, what I wanna do is to work on this table here. So I wanna make sure the table has the proper headers and everything so that we can display the 10 users. And then after we display the 10 users, then we're gonna get to the pagination, which is gonna be really interesting. So let's go ahead and start working on the table here to display all of these users. So let's go back to the code. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just copy this and cut it out because I don't want to keep it here. I'm gonna go all the way to the top, and the first thing I want to do is to put everything inside of a ng container. So here I'm gonna say ng-container. Okay, and then I'm gonna close. So inside of the ng container is where I'm gonna check to see if the state is defined. So here I'm gonna put a $ or asterisk instead. I'm gonna say ng if set it equal to some value, and I'm gonna say if the state, so the state right here is defined. We don't need the JSON anymore because we're just subscribing, and we don't need the curly braces anymore. I'm gonna remove this space as well. So we're gonna say we're gonna subscribe to this observable. So we're gonna say ng if the state is defined async, because we need to subscribe to it, and then we're gonna give it an alias as state. Okay, so that it can be easier to work with throughout the rest of the template, so that we don't have to keep typing this user state here. We're just gonna give it this alias or this local variable name of state. And then what I wanna do then is to just switch on the different state. So now I can just say here, I'm gonna use ng switch. So we're gonna say ng switch. Okay, we're gonna switch on the different cases or the different states. So we're gonna say state, which is a local variable, and we wanna switch on the app state. So the app state here, if you guys remember, it's gonna be either uploaded, loading, or app error, because then I can use the different states to show different pieces of UI depending on the state of the application. So this is really cool / advanced Angular that I'm showing you guys here. So I'm gonna cut this here, put it at the very bottom because I'm encapsulating everything inside here. And just to not throw you off with this router outlet, I'm just gonna remove it. Okay, so everything is inside of the ng container. So none of this is gonna be displayed unless the state is defined, even if it's an error. But if it's null or if it's undefined, then nothing is gonna show on the page. You might want this behavior, you might not want this behavior. But the reason that I like coding this way is because either way, I'm gonna get some kind of state. Either loading, because you remember, I'm starting with loading. So I can show whatever I want on loading. So you didn't have to put this if statement all the way at the top. You could have put it anywhere you want in the UI and then show whatever piece of UI you want to show when the data is being loaded. But I'm just gonna keep it at the top. Oops. All right. So now we have a switch case that we can use to check which state that we're in. So the first thing is I don't want to do anything inside of the nav. So I'm gonna collapse the nav. But after the nav, I want to show different pieces of UI inside of the of this column here. Okay, so wherever we're gonna have the main content of the page, that's where I want to show different states. So I'm gonna go in here and then do ng container again. So we're gonna say ng container and then close it. And then we want to switch case on the state of error first. So gonna put another asterisk and then do ng switch case. Okay, so we're gonna say if the case is, we're gonna look at app error. So let's go here and just copy this name just so that I don't misspell it and then paste it in here. So if there's an error, then this piece of UI will be displayed. And I don't want to do anything fancy here. I'm just gonna say from the state, get the error, and we're just gonna display it as a JSON. So we're gonna say JSON, which is just another pipe. So we're gonna see the whole object of the error if there's an error that occurs here whenever we make the call to the backend. So that's the first case. And then I'm gonna put the second case. The second case if when the app is loading. So let's just copy this name, paste it in here. Now it would be nice to show some kind of a loading spinner or something whenever the app is loading, right? That would make complete sense. So that's what we're gonna do here. So let's go back and open Google again, go to Bootstrap, press enter, first link, document or documentation in this case, and we're looking for a spinner. So spinner, I have a few choices here. We can go with the black one. We don't need anything fancy with colors, but feel free to choose either one. But I'm just gonna go with the black one. Maybe the gray one instead of the regular black. We can go with the gray, but either way it should be fine. But I'm just gonna go with the black. All right, so now let's go back to the UI. So in here, we can put everything inside of a div just to make sure this is in the center. So I'm gonna do dot deflex, and we want dot justified. No, not justified. Justify content center, and I can also give it a margin top of 4 just to make sure it doesn't stick all the way to the top. And I'm gonna press enter. That's gonna create a div for me with these classes, and I'm just gonna paste this in there. So if the state is app loading, then we're gonna have a spinner that's gonna display here. It's gonna be in the center and it's gonna say loading. I don't know if I want this text in here because we're just gonna have a loading spinner, but it's up to you. You can remove it, you can keep it, it doesn't bother me here. So that's good. Now if we go back and go back to the app, this is probably gonna happen so fast we're not gonna see the spinner, but let's just refresh it just to check. Okay, so you see the spinner was there for like a split second and then it disappeared. Let's do it one more time. Okay, you saw the spinner and then it disappeared. I'm gonna zoom out here, shrink this in a little, and let's see if we can simulate that. So let's go back to the back end and close this. Let's go over to the resource. So in the resource, we're gonna actually do two things here. The first thing is we're gonna put a delay here just so that we can see the spinner in action. And then the second thing we're gonna do, we're gonna set this to throw an error. So the first thing is we're gonna put the delay. So we're gonna say, let's do time unit dot second dot slip. Let's do 3 seconds. Okay, so this throws an exception. Let's just edit to the method signature. This is temporary. We're gonna remove it. I just want you to see the spinner and really make you understand why I'm designing the UI the way that I'm designing it. So let's go to run, rerun, make sure this comes up. Okay, restarting. All right. So now if I reload this page, you're gonna see the spinner for 3 seconds. Because remember, if I can bring the code back up, we're starting with uploading. Okay, because that's what we're seeing in this observable. Whenever this code runs, this observable is going to make a call. While we're waiting for the request to come back, we can actually show something else or return a different state or a different value to the state, which is going to be just app state is loading, which is what we're checking for. So let's go back and refresh. You see, loading. And then we get the data. You see the data appears on the right. Then it goes away because now we have to show a different piece of UI. Now, if we didn't want to see the user list at all, of course, that's what we're gonna do because we don't wanna show the table unless we have data. So let's go back and do that. So we're gonna go back here and go back in here, scroll down. You already get the idea. We're only gonna show this table if we get some data. So we're gonna, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this switch statement here. And then we can show the user list. But I don't think we should show the user list at all. We're just gonna put the title and the table inside of the switch case, unless we put this spinner inside, like under this. Like we're not gonna show the table, but we show the spinner where the table is going to be. But in this case, I'm just gonna put everything in there. So I'm gonna go here and copy everything. So from the title to the end of the table. Actually, we can just take this entire thing. Okay. We don't want to show any of this information, including the pagination, unless we get some data. So now we're just going to check for loaded. Okay. So when the data is loaded, we know we get some data from the backend. Then we're going to show the user list and the table. Now, if we go back, refresh, now we see the spinner. 3 seconds passed. Then we get the table. Okay, so that's a better behavior. And now let's see if we can simulate the error because we have 3 cases we have to account for. Let's go back to the backend. Where is my backend here? There it is. So after 3 seconds, we can do throw new runtime exception. And then we're going to pass in a message to say force exception for testing. Okay. And now we can temporarily maybe comment this out. Okay. And rerun. So what's going to happen is the app is going to run. It's going to make the call to the backend. It's going to wait for 3 seconds. The whole time the spinner is going to be spinning. And then after 3 seconds, the app is going to throw this exception. So it's going to throw an error, like a 500 error will show the error on the page. So now if we refresh, we get the spinner spinning. After 3 seconds, we get the error. You can see the error. Okay, so you can pick whatever information you want in this area. Like if I zoom in a little, you can see there is like a status, a timestamp, there's a message, HTTP failure response for this specific request or this specific URL. You can use whatever information you want here. Just put, state.error dot and then whatever property you want to step into here. So that's up to you, whatever you want to show to the user. Definitely not going to show this because they don't want to see all this stuff. This is probably going to scare them away. So make sure you use, show something friendly or something like that. Or you can even do, I can show you a quick example actually. So you can say whenever there's an error, you can say, give me a span and then maybe give it a style, color, red. And then you can say something like, there was an error. Simple as that. And then if we go back now, it's going to spin for 3 seconds. There was an error. Okay. You can either put a static type 10 message, or you can use something from the backend or something like that. It's really up to you. I just wanted to show you how easy it is to do this because we're really switching on the different states of the application. Okay. So let's go back and let's just put it the way it was. I'll leave that up to you, however you want to do this. Control Z, Control Y. Okay. So now we have the 3 states that we can work with. So everything looks good. Now, the only thing that we have left to do is to loop over the users and then display them on the table. So the first thing is we have to define the different table headers. So that's what we're going to be working on next. So let's go ahead and work on the table head. So we have the ID. Second thing I want is the photo. And then I want the name. And then I want the email. And I'm just gonna copy this and paste it a few times. 1, 2, 3. So after the email, we can put in the phone and then maybe the status. And then we can pass in lastly the address. So this is the head of the table. We can double check just to make sure we get this correct. Oh, we gotta fix the backend. We don't want this anymore, but I'm gonna, okay. I'm just gonna put it here and then comment it out just so you guys can remember what was done. Remove that. Okay, so we're still gonna wait for 3 seconds just to make sure we understand what's happening, but feel free to remove that too if you want. Okay, all right, that looks good. So now if we refresh, loading, and there is the headers. So ID, photo, name, email, phone, status, address. That doesn't look good because we haven't put in everything for the table role. We're gonna do that right now. And we don't need all of these because they're gonna be dynamically generated. So we're just gonna need one because we're gonna loop through all the users to generate this data. We want to loop over the table role because that's what we're duplicating or we're looping over. So here we can use the ng4 because we're trying to loop on something. Let user of, and then we want to go to the state that app data.page.content. Okay, I hope you guys remember where this is located. And if we want to see the index, we can say let I equal index. That's pretty simple, just like that. Index. So that's how we're gonna loop through all of the users. Let's go here and pass in the user.id. We need to pass in the picture of the user. So inside of the table data, we're gonna put an image, so img, and then we're gonna put the source, so src equal to user.image URL, just so that this doesn't blow out of the screen. Let's give it a width of maybe 42 and a height of 42, and we can give this some bootstrap class, so rounded circle. Okay, so this is just a bootstrap class, and we can probably give it let's say an alternative. So we're gonna say alt, and if the picture is not being displayed, then we pass in the name of the user, so user.name, and then we can say something like plus and then photo, just like that. So if the image is not displayed for whatever reason, the backend fail or it's a bad URL, then we can have the alternative that's gonna say whatever the username is, photo. We can put escape s. Okay, like if this is John Smith, so that's gonna be John Smith's photo. That's a little trick you can do here. And then after that, we need the username. So I can change this now to double curly braces user.name. And the next one is the email. So double curly braces user.email, and gonna copy this and paste it down. After the email, we're gonna have the status and the address. So after the email, we're gonna have the phone and then the status. After the status, we're gonna have the address. Okay, I think we should be good. So let's go back. There we go. You can see we have our 10 users. All the information is being displayed and everything looks good. And I'm going to refresh the page just so that you can see everything in action. It's loading. And then we get the data. One more time. We're loading the data. And then 3 seconds. There we go. Now, the next thing we need to do is to show the pagination. So we have to show how many pages there is for all these users in the database because we're only querying the first 10. So we have to use this information of the page that you see here. So this information, which is the page coming from Spring Data. So we have to use all of this information. So we know we have a total page number of 10. So total pages is 10. So we should have 1 through 10 here as total pages. And then we should make all these things clickable and everything. So let's go ahead and start working on this next. But before, I want to fix the status because we have to use the bootstrap badge to make the status look a little prettier. Let's do that real quick before we jump into the pagination. So let's go to the back application again. So in the status, instead of passing in the status like this, I'm just gonna pass in a spin. So go on a new line, and then I'm gonna say, give me a spin. Inside of this spin, I'm gonna give it a class of badge. Okay, so that's the main badge class. And then I want to pass in the status. So inside of here, I'm still gonna have the status, but then I'm gonna give it another class dynamically. And to do this, I'm just gonna use ng class, and then I'm gonna put some condition in here. So the first condition is I'm gonna check what the status is. So I'm gonna say user.status, and then I'm gonna check to see if it equals active. So active, then I'm gonna put the background of success. So I'll put a question mark. If that's the case, then add this class, which is gonna be bg success. Otherwise, so the colon, don't put anything. The reason I put a space here is because I think what's gonna happen is these classes are gonna be put together. I don't know if Angular is gonna add a space in between or anything, but I just add the space just in case so that I can have the other class after a space from the first class. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So now at least for the active one, we should see that they have the background success. So let's go back. You can see they have the background success. That looks a lot better. So now we have to do the same for pending and inactive or whatever. So I'm just gonna copy this, and you can add multiple condition. You just have to add a comma. So I put a comma and then I paste it again. So I'm gonna say if it's pending, then we want to add the primary. So here I'm gonna say primary, the background primary, which is the bootstrap blue color. And I'm gonna put another condition, probably have to put this on a no line. The other condition is, I'm gonna paste this again, is if it's inactive. So I'm gonna say if it's inactive, then we want maybe info. And then lastly, I'm gonna paste this one more time. Make sure you put this on a no line though. If it's been, we're gonna pass in the danger. So danger, okay? So that's all we have to do. It's gonna be a long string, but it's gonna do the trick. Just make sure you put this on a no line because it's better so that it can be more readable. I just don't like to put this on different lines. Really just a personal preference. But if I was coding this for like, let's say I was working for a company and I was coding this for like the company, I wouldn't do it like this. I would put it on a no line. So now everything should look good. Okay, so this is looking good. Next, we're gonna be working on the pagination, which I'm sure you guys are here for the most part. So let's go ahead and start working on the pagination. One last thing I want to show you before we go to the pagination, we can change the default data that we have in the service. I just want you guys to see this in action. So let's go back to the code again, and let's go to the service. The service is up here. And for example, if I say instead of 10, let's say give me like, I don't know, 18 users. So the size or the number of row is going to retrieve from the database is going to be 18. So now if we go back, we should see 18 users. You see we have 18 users. So let's change the page, for example, give me page number 4. So now if we go back, so now you see that it starts from 73. So just to make sure you can keep this in perspective, I'm gonna go back to 10 users, and then I say give me page 7. So the first user on that list should be 70 or something. Should be 71, right? 71, right? So 71 to 80. Because we're displaying per 10 and we have 10 pages worth of 10 users. I just want to show that you can already see that everything is working, like the pagination is working. We just want to make these buttons work with the pagination. So let's go back here and put this back the way it was. So we're going to put 0 by default and then 10 users. Okay, so you can see that in action. Now let's go back to the pagination, which is in this nav here. Okay, so you see this entire nav, that's the navigation that we have. The first thing is this first element, so this first li and this last li, they're gonna stay because they have the previous and the next. I'm gonna see if I can format this a little. Okay, so that the li can be aligned. And then everything in between, so these 3 LIs, they're gonna be dynamically generated, which means we don't need 3 of them, we only need 1 because we're gonna be looping through this and then generate the different pages. And then in there, I'm gonna put this on a new line just so that you guys can see it better. That number should probably go in here. So you see we have this link here. Put this where it belongs. 3 things going on here. The previous button, the next button, and all the buttons in between. And this is going to be dynamically generated because we have to put however many pages that we have in here. We can't hard code the number of pages because this is coming from the back end. So before I start coding anything, I just want to show you where this data is coming from. So if you look at the response, look inside of the data, you look inside of the page, we have the content, which is the actual users. We're looking for this guy right here, total pages, okay? And I'm gonna show you that if we change how many users we're loading here, then we're gonna have a different number of pages. For example, if I go back to the, not the back end, I wanna go to the front end again. So if I go back to the, to the service, right? Say I wanna load, instead of 10, I'm gonna load 20. In this case, then, since we're loading 20, we're gonna have 5 pages in total. So now if we go back, you see we load 20 users, which means if we look here inside of the page, total pages is now 5. So this is dynamic. It depends on how many users we're loading. And this is exactly what we want because we want to generate for however many pages we have for however many buttons we want to have in the middle and between these two here. So that's exactly what we want. So let's go back to the back end, to the front end again, revert that to 10. Close this, just wanted to show you. So now we're gonna use first thing is remove this href. So remove these, and then in the middle we're gonna take care of the previous and the next button in a minute. So we're gonna work on this in between so that we can dynamically generate the page number. So what I want to do is to loop inside of this li. So we're gonna say $ or asterisk ng4, and then we want to say let page number of, and then we want to go to state.app.data, and we want to go inside of the data.page.total pages. Okay, so remember, total pages is the number. Now remember, we need an array to loop over things with this format. With ng4, we need an array, and remember, this is a number, so this is not going to work, right? We can't loop over a number. So if we go back here, it's broken because we can't loop over a number. So what we can do here to make our life easier is to just call the constructor right in here in the template. So we can say open and close curly brackets dot constructor, right? We're calling the constructor on the number of pages. So we're gonna pass in the total pages. Now it doesn't complain anymore. And then also we can pass in the index. We can say let I equal index. Okay, so we have the index, and then we have the total pages that we're looping through. So whatever page number that we have here, it's gonna give us for that many li. So if we have 5 pages, then we're gonna have 5 of these. So now I can do curly braces, and I'm gonna pass in the index. I can't pass this page number because it's I don't even know what that is. It exists, like it's there. You just can't see what it is. And I can show you that first, actually. So if we pass in this page number here, you would expect it to be something from 0 to 8 or something, but it's not. It exists. It's not null. It's not undefined, but it's just not a number, I guess. I've been trying to see how I can print this out to see what it is, but we're not gonna worry about this. So now you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but then you don't see any numbers. So that means that the page number is there, it's just not a number, which is why we're not going to use it. There's another way we can solve this though, by using a pipe, which if I have time, I might show you. It's pretty simple, but you pass in the total pages and then you pass in a pipe. The pipe, what it's going to do is it's going to take the number and then just create an array out of it. And in that case, we'll be able to use it. But for now, we're going to use the index, which is also going to work. So now if we go back, wait for 3 seconds, we have all of our pages. But then there is a little bit of a problem because this doesn't make sense to a human. This makes sense to a computer. Hey, array starts at 0 index, which makes sense, right? But it doesn't make sense for us to show page 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's better to show page 1 to 10 instead of 0 to 9. Pretty easy to fix. We're just gonna add 1 to this. So we're gonna come here, plus 1. So from the user perspective, they're gonna see page 1 through 9, but we know it's page 0 to 1, which is what Spring Data JPA works with. The first page is page 0. So as we go back, we get all of our pages. Okay, so this is the first step. And just to show you that this is actually working, if we go back to the front end again and go to the service, and this time instead of loading 10, let's say we're gonna load, just gonna put an arbitrary number here, 35. Now it's gonna give us a different page number. Let's see. Now we load 35, we have 3 pages. Okay. So you see that is working. Now to make sure you really get this, I'm just gonna put 20 here because I know you can do that in your head. So if I put 20, instead of 10 pages, we're gonna have 5 pages because we have 100 users. And now if you scroll down, you can see we have 5 pages. So this is working dynamically and correctly the way that we want it to work. Now the second thing we have to do is we want to make sure that whenever we click either previous or next or either one of these buttons or either one of these LI, we actually make a request to the backend and we're gonna search for that particular page in the backend. So let's go ahead and start working on that. And also before I do that, I'm gonna change this to 20 because I want you guys to be able to see the bottom here. And let's go here and change this to 10. Okay, back, it's gonna refresh. It's probably time for us to remove that 3 seconds. We don't need it anymore. But anyways, you can see now we have our 10 pages and it's in a good spot on the screen where you can see it clearly. So let's go ahead and start working on making these buttons work or these LIs work. So let's go back to the code. We don't need the service anymore. All right, so I'm gonna create another function. So copy the existing one, go down and paste it. I'm just gonna call it, say go to page. Okay, this is the function that's gonna be called whenever we go to a different page. And then here, I'm gonna make it take a name, which is gonna be optional. Okay, we don't have to pass a name. We can just call the function without passing a name. And then we want the page number. Okay, the page number is also optional and the type is gonna be a number. Okay, it's gonna return void. Now, what I want to do is to do the same thing. The state, we're gonna set it equal to something, right? Which is gonna be this. Now to start with, we're not gonna start with app loading because the app is already been loaded. So I'm gonna copy the loaded and paste it in here. The app is loaded. I don't wanna see the spinner again when I search or when I, or not search, but when I click on the second page. I don't wanna see the spinner. You can show the spinner if you want, but you don't want the existing data to go away. And if we change the state to loading, then we're not gonna see this part right here. Okay, because we're only showing this part, which is the table and everything, when the state is loaded. So we have to make sure that we keep whatever it was already on the screen. We want to make sure we keep that. We don't want to get rid of it, which is why this is going to be loaded. Now, the second thing we have to pass is the app data, because even if we show the UI, if there is no data, then it will still crash because we're going to try to access, these users and they won't exist. Now, if we're going to pass the app data, which is really the data on the page, we need this data. And remember, we already got this data when we make the initial request, or when the page loads, we get the data here. So it would make sense to store this data somewhere and then later retrieve it here, because you can see now we don't have access to start with anything because this response only going to exist when we have a response, which is going to be in here. It doesn't exist here, because this is what we're starting with before we get the response back. So obviously there's no response yet, or it's never gonna be here because it doesn't belong in this. This is what we're starting with. So we have to make sure that whenever we get the response the first time, we save it somewhere. And then whenever we're gonna start with, whenever we're searching or not searching, whenever we're going to a different page, we keep the same data on the screen. So we keep the UI piece on the screen, and we also keep the data. Otherwise, the UI will be there, the table will be there, but the app will be broken because there's no response, which is where all the data is. So to solve this problem, like I mentioned, we're gonna keep a copy of the response here. So to do this, I'm gonna say, let's create a response subject, and we're gonna say next, and we're gonna pass in the response. So we're gonna say response. So we're gonna save the response. Well, this is supposed to be this. This doesn't exist yet. I'm gonna create it in a second. So this response subject is gonna contain the data. So let's go ahead and create that, declare property in the class. And this is gonna be a behavior subject. So I'm gonna say this is gonna equal a new behavior subject. And the behavior subject has a type, which is gonna be the whatever type that is. So this is the type. And initially, it's gonna start with null. So we're gonna say null. Okay, so if you didn't do the change that I did in the configuration, when you pass null here, it might give you an error. So just as a reminder, in the ts.config file, you need this property, okay? You need to set it to false. Otherwise, you're gonna have to put way more code than you would to make sure that this stops complaining, because it's gonna complain. Okay, so this behavior subject is gonna contain the response because we're passing it in here to this subject. So now when we're starting with, so we can grab the existing data. So this response subject, and then we wanna get the value. Okay, pretty simple. So whenever we click on this function, we're gonna reset the entire state of the application. So we're gonna make a request, and this request can take some time. So in the meantime, what is the state going to be? We don't want the state to be empty because the app will break. So then we say, all right, then keep the UI loaded. So we can keep showing this piece of UI. And for the data, here's the existing data, okay? We're accessing the value property. And you can see, because I typed this, the value is of type API response of type page, which is exactly the data that we need to pass to app data. Okay, you can see it here. It's the same thing here. So everything is aligned the way that we want it to be. And the error is gonna be the same. So if there's an error, we're still gonna not show the UI anymore because there was an error, and then we can show the error. Now you don't have to not show the UI. You can still pass in loaded here, and then you just show the error maybe like at the top of the table or something. It's really up to you. You can take this and do whatever you want with it. I'm just showing you an example. Okay, so now we can take care of this right here now. Now remember, this function take a name, so we can pass in the name here. Even if it's empty, whatever the case might be, we can still pass it in here. And it also take the page, so we're gonna say page number, and that's what we have to do. Now the next thing is, whenever we get this response, we also have to save it. Because if they click on the next page, we want to keep the existing data as well. Because whenever they click on go to page, it's gonna start with this. So if this function was called once, then it's gonna grab the data that was saved when we load all of the users. So the next time they click on go to page, then it's gonna use the existing information or the existing data, which is all the users. So then you will see that the page, if you were like, for example, on page 3, then you click to go on page 4, you would see that the UI would go back to page 1 because this, or page 0, because this is gonna give you the first page, and then it's gonna change when we get the response. This is not the behavior that we want, which means that when we get this response, we're gonna update our data. So copy this line and then paste it in here, above or below, doesn't matter. So whenever we go to page, we're gonna use whatever the existing data is, we're gonna keep it there. When we get the response, we're gonna update that data with this response, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So I think that's everything that we need to do for this to work. So now we can copy this function, go to the UI, go down, and we need to put this in here, okay? So what we want to do is to put a click event. So we're gonna say parentheses, click, we pass in the name of the function. Now the function takes a name. For now, I'm gonna pass an empty string. And then it takes the page number, okay? Because remember, if we go back here, you see page number, which we're passing into this observable, which takes the page number. Okay, so now we can say, well, the page number is going to be I. Whatever I is, that's the page number. Whatever the current iteration is, that's the number of the page. So if we are in the third iteration, then the page number is 2 because it starts at 0. We're just adding 1 here to not freak out our users. So now I can do the same for these guys right here. But this one is going to be a little bit interesting, and we're going to do it in just a second. But let's go ahead and test just this part right now. So now if we go back, refresh. Okay, next time I'm going to remove this because we don't need it anymore. Clear the screen. And right now we're supposed to be at page 0, which means if I click the 1, it shouldn't do anything. It should give me the same data. We're going to see the response in the console, but the data is not going to change because it's going to be the same data. So if I click 1, it's going to take 3 seconds. Then we get the response. We still get 1 to 10 because it's page 0. And we can see that because if we go into the network actually, and we look at the last call, you see that we're still looking at page 0. You see it right here in the corner. Page 0 size 10, and then we didn't pass in any name. We passed an empty string. So now the data is going to change if we click on page 2. So if I click on 2, it's going to take 3 seconds. You see the data has changed. Okay, so we get page 2, which is from 11 to 20. Now let's fix the backend. Comment out this code. We don't want to wait 3 seconds. And then refresh. Okay, so now you see that this is working. And I'm going to wait for the backend to come up. And I'm going to click on page 3. Okay, so we're up and running. If I click on page 3, we should get 21 to 30. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 100, the last user. Okay, all right, so we have a few more things to work on. We have to work on the previous and the next. So let's go ahead and work on those next. All right, so let's go ahead and start working on the previous and the next. Let's go back to the code. You see that whenever I'm calling this function, I need to know what page that I'm on. And I know what page that I'm on because I'm looping through this. So whatever the current iteration is, which is whatever button this is in, or whatever LI or list item this is in, then I get the index because we're looping into this. But you see that this LI and this other LI, they're not in the loop. So we need a different function that we can call so that we can go to the previous page or go to the next page. So what I'm going to do is go back in here, and then I'm going to create another function. I'm going to call this function go to next or previous page. Very descriptive. And then it's going to turn void. All right, so now we can possibly take a name. Well, first thing, let's take a direction. This is more important. So the direction, I'm going to make it optional. It's not really optional in this case, but let's keep it optional for now. The direction is going to tell me, did they click on the forward or the backward button, or the previous or the next button? And then I want to know if they pass in any name. So we're going to say name, which is a string. So they can possibly pass in a search term. We haven't used the name yet, but we're going to use it. Well, we're using it here, but we haven't passed in any value for it because you see that we're passing an empty string. When we do that, we get all the users because we didn't specify any search term. It's empty string. And by default, Spring just loads everybody. I mean, according to the page number, so it's going to load all the users. We need the direction, forward or backward or previous or next, and possibly a name. Okay, so now what we can do, we can check to see what the direction was. So I'm going to say this dot go to page. We're going to call the same function, and then the first thing we have to pass in is the name if there is one, and then we need to pass in the page number. You can see the page number is in blue, which means that's the next parameter we have to pass. So what we can do here, we can say check the direction, see if it's, for example, we can check for previous or next, but I'm gonna do maybe like forward. Okay, so if they go forward, what are we gonna do? We can define another property here, which we're gonna call current page subject, and I'm gonna show you why I'm defining everything as behavior subject in a minute. We're gonna add the value, and then we're gonna add 1 to it because we know that they're going forward. so +1. Otherwise, we're gonna remove 1. So we're gonna say this -1. -1. Oops. Okay. And then close. So the direction is what's going to determine if we're going to add 1 to the page number or remove 1 to the page number. Now we have to define this guy. So let's go and use the quick fix, define the property. And then we're going to make it a behavior subject. So I'm going to copy all this. And this is going to be a number. And then by default, I think we can start with 0. So this is the subject that we're going to be working with. And then we can define an observable for that subject. So we're going to say, our first thing is we're not going to use this in the UI. So we can make it private. So the private current page subject, we can only use it in that class. And then we're going to define current page, which is the observable. So we're going to put the $. And then we're going to watch for this. So this current space subject, we're going to watch it as an observable. Okay, so this is how you create an observable like this in the class. So by default, the page is going to be 0. We can set the page here as well when we get the response. So we're going to say this dot current page subject dot next. This is how you add value to it. And then we're going to access the response that I think we have to go to data dot page dot we want the number. Okay, this is going to give us the page number. So even the page number is dynamic. It's coming from the back end. And we can do something similar in the go to page. So we can come up here. We can pass in this page number. It's going to be the same anyway, but just to show you something different, it's going to be the same thing. So we pass in the page number here, which is why now we can use the subject and then check to see which direction we're going to. And then we can either add 1 or we can either remove 1. And I have too many equal signs here. All right. So if the direction is forward, we add 1. If it's backward, we remove 1. Or if it's not forward in this case, then we remove 1. So now we can copy this function, go to the UI, and in here, we're going to add a click event. So inside of this link here, we're going to say we're going to listen to a click event. We're going to call this function in the direction. Oops. So the direction here is going to be backwards. Okay, because they're trying to go to the previous page. So we're going to say backward. And then the name for now, we're going to put empty string. Okay, and we're going to do the same here for the next one. The only difference is it's going to be forward because this is where they click next. Oops. Okay, so when they click forward or they click next, then we're going to add 1. When they click previous, we're going to remove 1 because this is not going to be forward. Then this logic will kick in. You'll remove 1. So now if we go back, all right, now if I click next, I got 11 to 20, next, and next, and next, 50, previous, 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 previous. Now, there is another problem. We're on the page 0, technically. To the user, it's page 1, but it's really page 0. We know that because we're the developers. Now, if I click this, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to fail because we're on page 0, then it's going to go negative. So if I click this, boom, it fails. Why? Look, if I zoom in, page equal -1. That doesn't make sense, right? The page has to be 0 or whatever the last page is, but we can't have -1. So that's why it fails. So let's refresh this. Now, the way that we're going to solve this, ooh, this is huge. The way that we're going to solve this is whenever the page is 0, disable this button. And whenever we're in the last page, disable this button. Pretty simple, right? So how are we going to implement this? I'm going to show you right now. So the first thing I want to do is I want to define some CSS to disable this. So let's go back to the app and let's go to the CSS file. And I'm going to create a class that I'm going to call disabled. All right, open and close curly braces. And I want the pointer event to be none, because we don't want them to be able to click anything. And then I'm going to change the opacity a little. Let's say like 0.5 or 6 or something. So the opacity is going to be a little different. And of course, they're going to have 0 pointer event, which means when they put their mouse over it, it's not going to give them the pointer or anything like that. So this is the class that we're going to apply dynamically depending on a specific condition. Let's close this style for now. Now, back in the UI, what we're going to do is inside of this li, we're going to add a class dynamically, which is the class that we just created, the disabled class. So remember, in here we have this observable, which is the current page. At any given moment in the application, this variable is going to contain the current page of the application. So we can use this current page to determine if it's the first page or the last page, so that we can apply the style that we just defined to make the button disabled or the li disabled. So let's copy this variable. Go back here. So in this first one, the li, not just the anchor element here, we want to disable the entire thing. Okay, we don't want them to be able to click on it. So I'm gonna go up here, put a space, and then I'm gonna use ng class again. So I'm gonna say ng class, and then I'm gonna say there's 0 equal, and I'm gonna subscribe to that observable, the current page, and then of course we have to subscribe async. And then I'm gonna put a question mark. If this is the case, then I'm gonna add my class. Otherwise, I'm just gonna put empty, just like that. Okay, so there's 0 equal the current page. If this is true, then I know I'm at the 0 or the first page, then we can't go to previous because this is supposed to be disabled. We're already on the most previous page that we can be on. So now I can just say, well, let's go back to the CSS. Copy this, close, and then paste it in here. Put a space, paste it in here. Okay, so we're saying if 0 is the current page, then this li is disabled. Let's see if it works. It works. You see, it's disabled. Now, if I go to 1, if I go to 2, now it's enabled because we're not on the first page anymore, because the page is no longer 0. It's at this point is 1. If I go to 1, it's disabled. So now we're gonna do something similar for the last button here, or the last li. We're gonna say, hey, are we on the last page? If this is true, put the same class. Otherwise, just don't put anything. Let's go back to the UI. I'm gonna copy this entire thing, put it on this li. Paste. Now, what are we going to be looking for? Well, how are we going to get the last page? How are we going to do that? So what we can do is we can say, well, we're going to access the total pages. So I can copy this entire thing. I go here, instead of 0, we're going to paste that in there. So this is going to be the total pages. Now remember, the total pages doesn't start at 0, it starts at 1. So we need to remove 1 from it. And then we're going to see if it equals the current page. If this is true, disabled. Otherwise, add nothing. So one more time, we're going to look at the total pages. So for example, the total pages is going to be from the JPA perspective. Right now we have 10 pages. The total pages, that number is 10. But from a JPA perspective, it's really from 0 to 9 instead of 1 to 10. So that's why I'm removing 1 from the total pages, because technically when you go here, reload this, we know right now we have pages from page 0 to 9, but JPA trying to make this user friendly, and the total pages is 10, but really it should be 9 because it starts at 0. But of course they want to make this user friendly, they say it's 10 pages, which is okay. We can still use this data, by the way. So that's why we have to remove 1 from it, because this is going to be from 0 to 9. It's not going to be from 1 to 10. So I have to remove 1. Let's go back here again, remove 1, which is going to be 9, which is going to be the last page that we can be on if we're loading 10 users. So now you see that if I reload, if everything is correct, and I go to page 10, it's disabled. Okay, so you can see we're on page 10 because we have the last 100th user. So last page, this is disabled. First page, this is disabled. And that's the behavior that we want. Now I see that I don't get any pointer when I over these. I want to have the pointer so that the user can see that they can click on this. They're probably gonna see that anyway, but let's go ahead and put a pointer in there. So let's go back to the app, CSS. I'm gonna create another class, so that I'm gonna call it pointer, and then we're gonna say cursor pointer. Okay, pretty simple. Copy this. We're gonna add it in all the list element. So in addition to page item, we're gonna pass in pointer, page item pointer, page item pointer. All right. Now, well, we can't see this because it's disabled, but we can see that we have the pointers now. Okay. So when I click next, 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 disabled, because we're on the last page. First, disabled. Okay, we have the pointer working. The next thing I want to do is to make the current page selected, or to add the active class on it. Because right now I can see that I have the pagination working, but I have no idea which page I'm on when I'm going through the pages. So it's extremely important that we show the user what page they're currently on. So let's go ahead and work on that next. So let's go back to the UI. So we have to use this li here. We're not worrying about the first one and the second one. They're not going to be involved. They're just going to make the user go to the next page. We don't have to make them selected or show that they've been selected, because they don't need to be selected. Whatever we're going to be selecting, it's going to be in the middle here. So those guys right here, not the next, not the previous. These are going to stay the way that they were. So let's go to the code again. I'm going to put this on a new line just so you guys can see, type it in a little. What we're looking for is this class, active, not just a bootstrap class. So if I do that, they're all going to be active. Okay, because there's no condition. Even if I go next, previous, it's all active. That's not what we want. We want one to be active, which is the one that we're currently on, the page that we're currently on. So let's go back and let me copy this class, because I want to add this active class dynamically. I'm going to paste it next to it and then cut it. The class that I want to add is active, and I only want to add active if the current page, so I'm gonna delete this. So if the current page is equal to the page that we're on. So instead of 0, we're gonna say I, so the current page and the iteration equal this guy right here. And we have an extra double quote here. Okay, I need to close this right here. There we go. So I'm saying I'm going to add this class dynamically, so the active, but I want to check to see if the current page equal the current iteration, which is going to be the page number, as you can see here. So if that's the case, then add the class active. Otherwise, add nothing. Go back. There we go. So now I can do next, 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 8, 9, 10, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everything seems to be working. At least that's one approach that I decided to take to make this work. By the way, you see that every time we click on a different page, we make a call to the backend. You probably don't want to build your application that way. You want to make sure you put this in a cache locally somewhere, possibly on the client, so that you can just return it. We don't want to make a request. For example, like if I go from one page, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then I go to page 1 again. If I clear this, go to page 1 again, I make another call to the database. That's not very performant, because I've already loaded all the pages. I shouldn't have to make another call to the backend again. So definitely don't build your app like this. We're not going to get into caching this time around. I just want to make sure that you're aware of this. I mean, if your app is simple, you're practicing, you're just, trying to up your skills a little, that's okay. But don't build an application like this. You're going to kill your backend with so many different requests, because people are just going to be clicking all these pages, and every time they're going to send a request. You don't want that. But anyways, the pagination is fully working at this point. Okay, so you can see everything is working as expected. All the behaviors we wanted, we have them, at least for the pagination. Now what we have left is this form right here. So I want to be able to search, shrink this in a little. So I want to be able to search here. I want to be able to put the name and search for that user, or just put some characters in here and search all the users by that name, and then have pagination working for that as well. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. So the last thing we have to do is to make this search user work, and let's just go ahead and work on that right now. So let's scroll up and see what this form is. It's inside of the navigation, and it's right here. Okay, so the form is right here. Hopefully you guys can see it clearly. So the first thing I want to do is to give it a reference. So I'm going to put the hash symbol, and I'm going to give it a name of search form, and then set it equal to ng form. So ng form. So we're going to have to import the forms module, but we'll do that in a second. And then we can add the ng submit. So we're going to say ng submit. Let's get rid of this error because it's going to be acting weird. So let's go back to the app module, and we need to import the forms module. Forms module. Okay. So now we should be good. Okay. So we can call the same function again. We can call go to page. You can call it search user or go to page, but I'm gonna go with go to page. But feel free to find a better name for it. And then here we can pass in, the first thing too we have to do is to give this the ng model. So we have to give it a type of, type equal, we're gonna set this to text. And then we have to give it a name, which is really important. So the name is going to be name. Okay, so that's the name of the user that they're passing in. And then we need to make this ng model. So now we have a reference for this input inside of this form. We can just say, whenever we call this function, remember, we need to pass in a name and a page. The page is optional. Let's just give this a default value. So if they don't pass any page number, then the page number by default is gonna be 0. And then the name is gonna be a string. So now we can say, go to this form reference, and then access the value property, and then we need to access the name. That name is a reference to this name here. Like if we name this something else, like something, then something. Okay, so not this name property, but the name value, which is why we're accessing the value here. So let me backtrack on that. Okay, so whenever we call the go to page, we're just gonna pass in whatever name that they pass into the input, because we're getting a reference from it from the form. And we can do the same thing. We can copy this and use it everywhere, because this reference is in the template. So it's available not just in the form, but everywhere else in the UI. So we can go down here, and when we pass empty string here, we can pass in the name. Here we can do that. We can do that here as well. And also here. Because this reference is on the form, it's available everywhere in the UI. So now we're passing in whatever value that they pass in for whenever we go to previews, or whenever we go to a page, or whenever we go to the next page. So let's go back. Actually, let's go up. Make sure this looks good first. Okay, go to page, and then we pass in the font value, ng model, and all that. Okay, cool. So I think that's all we have to do. Everything should work. Let's go back. All right, looks good. Refresh just to be sure. Okay. Looks good. Now if I put F, enter, you see it works. We have all the users with F in their name, and I can still go to pagination. So the second page has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 users. Previous works. If I put, let's put something very specific and see what happens. Copy this, remove, paste, and search. We got that one user. And of course, we don't have any previous or next page because we only have one page. And let's put something that's going to return more than one user, like AN, like I did in the beginning. Now we have 3 pages, and we can still go to all these pages. It's still going to be the same. Okay. All right. Everything looks good. Okay. All right. So another thing I want to do is, if there is no users, then I want to return like a message to the user. So let's see if we can go to Bootstrap, and let's look for alerts. All right. So that second one is fine, like this gray one. So let's copy the second div. Let's go back to the UI. Okay, so we're gonna go all the way at the bottom here after the table, and we can say something like, let's paste this in first. So we have the alert, and then we can say ng if the state that app data that page that content that length. We're just gonna check to see if it's say less than 1. Then we're gonna show this. We're gonna say let's say no users found. Okay, well, you can probably test this. Just delete your database and then see what's gonna happen. This should print out instead of this. Okay, because this is not gonna print out because it's gonna try to loop and it's not gonna find anything. So this is good. We can do something similar just for a sanity check. So we're not gonna show this at all. So the pagination, unless we get something. So we're gonna paste the same thing, and then we're gonna change this to greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0, the array, then we know we're gonna show this pagination. If it's less, which means there's nothing in the array, then we're gonna show this no users found. Now, we probably won't be able to see this because I have a bunch of users and I don't want to delete my database, but you can go ahead and test that. It should work. So I think this is everything that I wanted to show you guys how to do, and hopefully you learned something valuable. Now, one last thing, you see that, let's go back to the front end real quick. So if we go to the service, by default, we're passing in 10 as the size. So this is something that you can change. You can see that in our code, we're not working with the size, just the page number. Well, you can include the size. The only thing I would say is you probably would have to give the user, maybe on the left here, the size as a drop down. So you're gonna allow them to select either 10 or 20 per page, or 30, maybe 50 or whatever, or all. If you want, you can give them the all option as well, where you load all the users. Probably not a good idea, but you could do that if you wanted to. So you can take this as an assignment, which is to use the size and possibly create a drop down menu here on the left, or maybe you can switch this around. You put the pagination on the left, you put the size on the right, but I think the size on the left would be better. But anyways, it's up to you, however you want to design it. So I would put a drop down list here, which like 10, 15, 20, or maybe I just go by an increment of maybe 10. So I would go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, or whatever. And then the user can pick how many users they want to see per page. So that's going to be your assignment for this course, because I've literally coded everything for you. So this is for you to practice now, because I know you're going to go on GitHub and get the code, which is okay, because that's how you learn. You learn from other people's code, but you also have to work on your own and see if you can solve problems. Now, if you want, you can share the solutions with me. Whatever you came up with as the solution to use the size, you can share that with me. I'll be happy to look into it and check it out for you. You can put it up here as well. You can put another input here as a drop down, and the user can select either like 10 or 20. I actually almost implemented this. I actually started implementing it, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna leave it as an assignment for this course because I don't have any assignment for this course. So that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. Again, make sure you don't build your application this way. That's gonna go into production, because you should probably cache the response that you get from every page, so that if the user goes from page 1 to page 10, like they click on all the pages, then all this data should be cached. And if they click back on page 1, 2, 3, or whatever, then you don't make a call to the backend, but you get the data from the cache. So that's another thing I would say to keep in mind. But other than that, our application looks good. The search is working. Let's search here, paste this in, search. Okay, we have one person, we have one page, search everybody. We got everybody. We can go to the different pages. Yeah, so everything is working. So all the code is in the description. So make sure you grab all the code from GitHub. I'm just gonna leave the links for you guys. So just go ahead and grab all the code, and you can use this as a starting point for your application or whatever you want to build. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.